I discovered my wife's cheating, unraveled a dark plot, and got revenge on her affair partner. Seated at my desk, I checked my watch. It was almost 4. Soon I'd head home to kick off the weekend. This one was extra special, marking 20 years since I married Katie. I couldn't wait to whisk her away for a romantic weekend at our lake house. I picked up Katie's photo, a cherished gift from years ago, reminding me of our love. By the way, I'm Thomas West, but you can call me Tom. Katie and I fell in love in high school and tied the knot shortly after graduation. She insisted on waiting until our wedding day for closeness, and she was right. It made our honeymoon unforgettable. My parents were thrilled for us, giving me and keys to a townhouse to start. Dad explained it was just the beginning of a $1 million trust fund he set up after my birth. He rarely spoke of my biological mom, who passed when I was young, remarrying soon after. Rejected from the military due to diabetes, I pursued college with Katie. We dreamed of our futures until Jim, our son, arrived earlier than planned. Despite challenges, Katie became a teacher while I entered the business world, joining Ryder Industries. When I shared the news with Dad, he seemed proud but distant. I sensed something was amiss, but I refrained from pressing him. That's why I ultimately left the corporate world behind. For the next 16 years, life followed a typical routine. We worked, cared for our family, and enjoyed annual vacations. Due to time constraints, I quit martial arts classes about 5 years into marriage. Though Dad suggested exploring career options, I didn't dwell on it. Overall, Katie and I were content, despite the usual marital ups and downs. However, recently, I noticed changes in Katie's behavior. Initially, I attributed her mood shifts to the end of the school year and her reduced workload. She seemed withdrawn and occasionally sharp with me. I tried discussing it, but she brushed it off. Meanwhile, I was in the running for a VP position, competing with Alex Marr. Keeping the news to myself, I didn't think it influenced her behavior. Then it hit me. Our son Jim's graduation and acceptance to West Point might be causing her anxiety about an empty nest. To lift her spirits, I planned a surprise anniversary getaway. As I pondered this, my secretary's call interrupted. It was about a meeting with Jake Henderson, the CEO, likely regarding a promotion. I rose from my desk, tidied my tie in the bathroom mirror, and headed to the elevator, ensuring my smartphone was set to record the coming meeting. Arriving on the TH floor, home to the company's top brass, I made my way to Henderson's suite, where his assistant, Brenda, welcomed me. "Mr. Henderson is ready for you, Mr. West," she said, her grin piquing my curiosity. Henderson's voice invited me inside. As I entered his office, taking a seat opposite him, Harvey, one of Henderson's guards, poured me bourbon, a gesture of familiarity with my preferences. Henderson, relaxed in demeanor, took a sip of his drink before addressing me with a smile. After exchanging pleasantries, Henderson praised my politeness and inquired about my family. I assured him all was well, mentioning our son's recent departure for West Point and our upcoming 20th anniversary celebration. "Married for 2 decades?" Jake inquired, offering congratulations. "I called you here not to mess with you. I like you. Let's discuss my upcoming promotion. It's between you and Marlowe. The board needs to gauge your flexibility, your response to stress, and your dedication to our goals. Understand, a manager's day doesn't end at—" "I get it," I replied. "What specifics does the board seek?" "They want to witness your reactions firsthand," Jake explained. "They've reviewed your records, but they need more." "I'm not sure I follow," I admitted. Jake grinned, sipping his bourbon. "You'll get it," he assured. "How's your marriage?" "Solid, Mr. Henderson," I affirmed, sipping my drink. "Why do you ask?" "If it's as strong as you claim, cancel your weekend plans," he instructed. "Your wife should understand." He signaled Harvey, who ushered in Lenny Jameson, accompanied by Katie. She wore a revealing dress, surprising me with her appearance. The dress barely covered her backside. Though she glanced my way, she seemed unaware of me observing her medicated state. I noticed something white in one nostril. "Katie," I addressed her. "What's going on? Why are you dressed like that?" She remained unresponsive, her eyes glazed. Turning to Henderson, I demanded clarification. "What's happening? Why is she here like this? She's clearly medicated." "What did you give her?" Henderson chuckled, admitting to medicating her with a potent concoction. He gestured for Lenny to expose her further, revealing her bosom. I attempted to rise but found myself paralyzed, realizing Harvey had medicated me too. Henderson's sinister grin widened as Lenny undressed Katie completely, ignoring my protest. Henderson proceeded to engage in carnal acts with her, her glazed eyes betraying her medicated state. Furious and struggling against Harvey's grip, I glared at Henderson. "I'll eliminate you," I yelled. Henderson smirked. "Is that how you speak to family?" he taunted. "And in front of your dear wife?" She won't be my wife, I snapped. And what do you mean by family? Henderson revealed our shared parentage, shocking me. That's not true, I protested. Why? For many reasons, he explained. Firstly, as CEO, I have executive privilege. Secondly, I've always wanted to dominate my younger brother. You didn't think I hired you for your skills, did you? He revealed his calculated manipulation, claiming it was a long-term plan to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. Have you planned this all along? I demanded. Of course, he admitted. It's the long game. Now, your fate and your wife's are in my hands. He outlined his intention to seek revenge for past grievances, shocking me with his twisted motives. You're sick, I accused. Henderson shrugged. Maybe, he conceded. It is what it is. Here's the plan, Tom, he began again. No divorce. Your wife now serves me financially and personally. She's my exclusive companion, accessible anytime, anywhere. I'm whisking her to New York for a board presentation. Relax. She'll return, albeit perhaps disheveled. You won't get away with this, I retorted. He chuckled. Deal, he countered. You're powerless. He signaled Lenny, who struck me, apologizing. Just business, Mr. West. I awoke in a hospital bed, machines humming around me. Dad, exhausted, sat nearby. A nurse tended to me, offering ice. Dad explained I'd been unconscious for 4 days since Friday night. 4 days? I echoed. It's Tuesday, Dad confirmed. You were dumped at the ER. What happened? He asked, concern etched on his face. Later, upon the doctor's arrival, I acknowledged him. Good afternoon, Mr. West. I'm Dr. Pierce, he greeted. I'm glad to see you with us again. How do you feel? It's like I was hit by a truck, I replied. Everything hurts. I have no doubt, he concurred, noting my injuries. You've been pretty banged up. Nothing broken, but some bruised ribs and a small bruise. We were worried about a concussion. After his examination, he outlined the plan. We'll do x-rays and keep you overnight for observation. If all goes well, you can go home tomorrow. My dad called the police, I mentioned. They want to speak with you, he informed me. Afterward, Detective Blackstone introduced himself, eager to hear my story. I recounted what I could, then remembered my phone. Did you find my phone? I asked my father. Yes, he said, handing it over. I noticed unfamiliar text messages and decided to check them later. I found the audio recording and played it for the detective, capturing everything, including the sounds of the assault. I focused on what occurred afterward. Okay, get him out of here, Henderson ordered the guards. Take him to the hospital and say you found him there. Got it? Got it, boss, Lenny affirmed. We heard movement as they dragged me, then their conversation as they placed me in the car. Careful, Harvey cautioned. I don't want blood on the seats. He's a real pain, Lenny chuckled. Aren't they all? Harvey laughed before the recording ended. We have hospital security footage, Ryan explained. They threw you out of the car before driving off. EMTs found you and brought you inside. The car is registered to Ryder Industries. I informed HR, Dad added. Henderson already put you on sick leave for a week. Any word from Katie? I inquired. Dad shook his head. None, he replied. I've been trying to reach her, but no luck. We'll issue a bulletin, Ryan declared. Do you have a recent photo? Yes, I confirmed, retrieving my pictures. Okay, he agreed. Send this to me, along with the audio recording. I'll forward the photo to the NYPD and issue a warrant for Henderson and his thugs. Do you want to press charges? Absolutely, I affirmed. Definitely. Then we'll proceed, he assured. Just relax and let the professionals handle it, he advised. Okay, Detective, I acknowledged gratefully. Thank you. We'll keep in touch, Ryan promised, handing me his card. Call if you remember anything else. After he left, I turned to my father. Is what Henderson said true? I inquired. Yes and no, he replied. His father had his way with your biological mother, but she was already pregnant. After that, I filed for divorce and an alienation of affection lawsuit against Henderson. We couldn't do a DNA test back then, but we all have the same blood type, Dad said. He wouldn't bore me with all the details, but things at home worsened. My biological mother turned to drinking and medications, eventually dying from an overdose 6 months after I was born. Damn, I reacted. The lawsuit against Henderson and Ryder was ongoing, Dad revealed, but they settled out of court using the money to set up my trust fund. He couldn't disclose any details due to the agreement. About a year later, he met Patricia. She loved you from the start, insisting on adopting you after we got married. Unable to have children, she considered you her own. So, how did you know I was really your son? I asked. Remember the motorcycle accident when you were 16? He queried. Yeah, I recalled. Well, he elaborated, after I was injured, I requested a DNA test at the hospital to confirm our relationship, and I pressed. The results showed over a 99% likelihood that I'm your father, he explained. It means your biological mother was pregnant with you before Henderson's involvement. For me, you're my dad no matter what, I assured him, bringing a smile to his face. What happened to Henderson, I inquired. Dad informed me he died from a stroke around the time I entered college. His son stepped up as the new general director. I'd hoped the younger Henderson had learned from his father's mistakes, but I was mistaken, Dad explained. That's why you weren't thrilled about me joining there, right? I questioned. He nodded. Yes, he affirmed. I wished to tell you, but I couldn't. I appreciate it now. It's not on you, Dad, I reassured. I can't fathom how Katie could fall for his nonsense after all this time. It's baffling, I remarked. She may have been medicated, but something feels off. I pondered why she was there and in that attire. Just then, a knock sounded at the door. Yes? I called out. Brenda, Henderson's assistant, peeked in. May I come in? She asked timidly. Certainly, Brenda, I welcomed her. What's up? She entered, holding a bouquet of flowers and a large card. We all pitched in and got this for you, she explained, placing the flowers on the nightstand. She handed me the card. I'm really sorry about all of this, Brenda expressed. Did you know what Henderson planned? I inquired. I knew he had something with your wife, she admitted, but not this. She added, pointing to me, what went down? I probed. That morning he gave me a company card, told me to fetch your wife, said she was expecting me. He instructed me to take her out, get her a revealing dress, and then to a salon, Brenda disclosed. He also insisted that she get a bikini wax. A full wax? I questioned. Yeah, a Brazilian wax, Brenda recounted. I had a pretty good idea of what he meant. This isn't the first time he's pulled something like this. So your boss is using you to groom his girls? Dad questioned. Brenda's face flushed red, and she wisely averted her gaze. Did you know he medicated her? Dad pressed. He medicates all the women he sleeps with, Mr. West, she admitted. He loves to experiment. Has he ever medicated you? Dad inquired. She nodded. One time, she disclosed. He gave me just a small amount, she continued. Said it was only a quarter of the normal dose. It kept me going for about an hour. Do you know how much he gave my wife? I interjected. She shook her head. No, I don't, she admitted. He mentioned giving Katie 3 times the usual amount. I informed her. Her eyes widened, and she covered her face with her hands. Oh my God, she exclaimed. I had no clue. Your poor wife must have been out of her mind for hours. I bet she didn't even realize you were there. This stuff really messes you up. When I walked into your office, you knew what was going to happen, didn't you? I probed. She nodded solemnly. I knew, she confirmed, but I didn't expect him to be so cruel to you, honestly. Do you know where Henderson and my wife are now? I asked. Last I heard, they're still in New York, she replied. Would you be willing to talk to the police? Dad asked. I'll do whatever I can to help, she promised. She glanced back at me with tears in her eyes. I'm truly sorry about this, Mr. West. Just one more thing, Brenda, I added. What's going on? She inquired. Did my wife have any idea what was going to happen? I questioned. She nodded. I'm pretty sure she had an idea, Mr. West, she replied. I know Mr. Henderson has been in touch with her quite often in the past month or so, inviting her out to dinner multiple times. They've had long lunches. I'm not sure if anything happened between them or not. He never disclosed it to me. But do you think they were involved? I pressed. It's highly probable, but I can't say for certain. I'm not privy to all the details, she admitted. You seem to assist Henderson with things like this. Frequently, correct? Dad inquired. Quite frequently, she admitted quietly. So you condone his behavior, he probed. She shook her head. You misunderstand, she clarified. I'm a single mother with a child who has special needs, and Mr. Henderson compensates me generously for my assistance and my discretion. Well, your silence is what led to my son ending up in the hospital this time, young lady, he retorted, his patience waning. She took a step back as he glared at her. Mr. West, I truly didn't know they intended injury to your son. I would have warned him if I had known, she defended herself. Dad reclined in his chair, silently observing her. Brenda, the police detective will be reaching out to you regarding this matter, I informed her. I advise you to be available and fully cooperate. Understand? She nodded. I understand, Mr. West, she affirmed. All right, I said, and please convey my gratitude to everyone for the flowers and card. I will, she promised, dabbing at a tear in her eye. Once again, I'm sorry. With that, she turned and exited the room. After the door closed, I turned to my father. That sheds some light on things, I remarked. Katie has been acting a bit off since school ended. Initially, I thought it was because Jim had gone to West Point. We'll uncover the truth, he assured. Another knock sounded and a hospital attendant wheeled in a food cart. Dad grinned and rose. Dinner time, he announced. Better head home before Mom sends out a search party, he joked. Take care, son. Rest up. See you in the morning. Thanks, Dad, I replied. Say hi to Mom for me and tell her I love her. We do, son, he affirmed. And hey, love you too. We fist bumped, and he exited. The attendant smirked at Dad's departure, then served my meal. It smelled decent, and hunger gnawed at me after days without eating. I devoured the meatloaf and potatoes, relishing the mushroom sauce. Though not up to Mom's or Katie's caliber, it sufficed. Even the broccoli, which I usually avoid, tasted all right. After finishing dessert, I sipped coffee and checked my texts. 4 messages awaited, each with a video. The first from Friday read, "Enjoy. Bet you wish you weren't here." Unfamiliar, I hesitantly opened it. Katie stood before grinning men, her dress akin to the one Henderson forced her to wear. Recognizing the board members, I braced for the worst. They stripped her, and she complied. Anguish brooded, it had bolstered the lawsuit. Summoning courage for the next message from Saturday morning, regret filled me as Katie frolicked with men. The third, late Saturday, depicted her with multiple partners. The fourth, from early Sunday, diverged. Katie and Henderson stared into the camera. Her bloodshot eyes and dark circles revealed torment. Henderson sneered. "This is your wife's new life," he taunted. Turning to Katie, he commanded, "Tell him who I am, honey." "Jake Henderson is my master," she stated, her voice devoid of any emotion. "That's correct," he confirmed. "And what's your new role?" Henderson inquired. "I am my master's undressed lovemaking toy," she declared. "I engage in carnal activities with whomever he commands, whenever he commands, and however he commands, as frequently as he commands." "Very well," Jake acknowledged, "and convey to that idiot that he won't ever touch you again." "You betrayed man," Katie asserted, pointing a finger at the camera. "You'll never lay a hand on me again." Henderson chuckled at her remark before addressing the camera. "And remember," he said, "don't cause trouble, or the next time I have Harvey and Lenny talk to you, you might not wake up. See you later, loser. Goodbye." The video concluded. A surge of emotions washed over me: hatred, anger, sadness, disappointment. I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed and heard. It seemed evident that he had manipulated her. I glanced at the wedding ring on my finger. It held no significance anymore. So I removed it and tossed it onto the nightstand. Perhaps I could sell it for a few bucks at a pawn shop. At that instant, I was resolved to divorce Katie. I didn't care if Jake approved or not. Furthermore, I was determined to make him suffer. But how? Alienation of affection lawsuits were a possibility when my father divorced, but not anymore. I entertained thoughts of damaging that despicable fool, but in all honesty, he wasn't worth jeopardizing my freedom for. I contacted Ryan and briefed him on the videos and Henderson's threats. He requested that I forward them to him and assured me he'd be in touch. Following his instructions, I powered off my phone. I contemplated reaching out to Kathy, but concluded it would be futile. I placed my phone on the nightstand and turned on the TV, hoping to distract myself from what I had just witnessed. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep and found myself dreaming of happier times when I had a loving and faithful wife. The next morning, I awoke to the sounds of nurses bustling about my room, checking my vital signs and monitoring the equipment. 2 of them escorted me to the radiology department for additional x-rays before returning me to my room. Once back, an orderly brought me breakfast. Shortly after I finished my bacon and egg breakfast, Dr. Pierce entered my room with good news. "Everything went smoothly, and you're clear to go home," he informed me. He prescribed medication for the pain and provided a set of instructions. "Discharge paperwork will take about an hour, so why not give your parents a call to come pick you up?" he suggested. "By the time they arrive, you should be ready to go. Take care of yourself and make sure to schedule a follow-up appointment with your regular doctor within a week." "Thank you, Doc," I replied. "I'll do that." After he left, I contacted my parents and shared the positive news. About an hour later, they arrived at my room. Mom enveloped me in a hug, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Oh, Tom, I'm so sorry you had to go through this," she expressed. "How are you feeling?" "Could be better, Mom," I admitted. "Well, I whipped up some of my lasagna for you and kept it warm in the oven," she informed me. I always adored my mother's lasagna. It was rich with layers of cheese, mushrooms, and meat filling, a taste sensation unlike any other. I looked at her with gratitude. "Thank you, Mom," I said sincerely. "Your lasagna never fails to brighten my day." "I'm glad, son," she replied. Your father filled me in on what happened, and I'm furious. I have half a mind to give that woman a piece of my mind. Dad and I exchanged a knowing glance and chuckled. There was no doubt in my mind that if she were here, Mom would have taken Katie to task. Any updates? Dad inquired. I briefed him on the videos and Henderson's threat. Videos? Mom questioned. Trust me, Mom, you don't want to see them, I cautioned. They're beyond awful. I guess you'll need the name of a good divorce attorney, Dad remarked. Yeah, I agreed. There's no way to overlook what she did or is probably still doing, plus I need to break it to Jim, or it's going to devastate him. All right, I'll make some calls, Dad promised. Just then, a nurse entered with my discharge papers and instructions. Insisting I use a wheelchair, she wheeled me out while Mom and Dad walked alongside. At the loading dock, I slid into the back seat. Dad drove us home, stopping at a pharmacy so I could pick up my pain medication. I noticed my car parked in the driveway when we arrived. Your mom and I retrieved your car from Ryder on Saturday, Dad informed me. Kat's car is still in the garage. We entered the house, and its emptiness without Katie became painfully apparent. The aroma of lasagna wafting from the oven lifted my spirits a tad. I hope you don't mind, but I tidied up a bit yesterday afternoon, Mom mentioned. It was getting a bit stuffy. Not at all, Mom, I assured her. Thanks for everything. Just then, we spotted a dark sedan parked outside. I recognized Ryan stepping out of the driver's side, accompanied by another man in a suit. I welcomed them in. Detective Blackstone, I greeted. Please come in. I held the door as they entered. Ryan shook my hand and I introduced him to Mom. Can we offer you gentlemen something to drink? Mom offered. Coffee soda? Ryan declined. No, ma'am, but thank you, he replied. Then, turning to the other man. Mr. West, this is Detective Hawthorne from the NYPD Homicide Department. I was taken aback momentarily but extended my hand to Hawthorne. Please have a seat, I invited, and we settled in. Homicide? I echoed. Hawthorne nodded, presenting a photograph. Katie's face was recognizable, but she appeared lifeless, her complexion unsettling. Can you confirm the identity of the woman in this photo? Hawthorne inquired. That looks like my wife, Katie, I confirmed, but she was alive early Sunday morning. I have a video. Did she have any distinguishing marks or tattoos? Hawthorne probed. Yes, a small dolphin tattoo on her upper right thigh, I recalled. She got it on a dare 15 years ago. Hawthorne glanced at Ryan and then back at me, his expression somber. I regret to inform you, Mr. West, but it appears that your wife may have been murdered, he stated. Murdered? I exclaimed. How? When? That's what we're investigating, Mr. West, Hawthorne replied. The coroner is still examining her, but the initial assessment suggests she died from a massive heart attack. But wouldn't that rule out murder? I questioned. Well, her body was discovered in a shallow grave in Central Park yesterday afternoon, Hawthorne disclosed. In my experience, such findings typically indicate foul play. We're awaiting toxicology results, which may provide more insight. What more can you tell us? I recounted the entire ordeal to them. Ryan took notes while listening attentively, though he had heard the details before. Retrieving my phone, I played the audio recording and then the video for them. Mom, overwhelmed, burst into tears and Dad ushered her out of the room, leaving me alone with the detectives. After they finished viewing the footage, I shared Brenda's account. They made notes and exchanged glances before addressing me. This clarifies the bruises and condition of Mrs. West's body, Hawthorne remarked. Turning to me, he continued, This woman, Harris, is she on duty today? To my knowledge, yes, I replied. We need to speak with her. Hawthorne directed at Ryan, who nodded in agreement. He then turned to me again. What do you know about the medication Henderson mentioned, the super ecstasy? He inquired. Not much beyond what Brenda told me and what I experienced, I admitted. The doctor mentioned that the substance they used on me had already left my system. Henderson and his associates, any insights there? Ryan pressed. Henderson's private jet departed from New York last night. According to the pilot's filed flight plan, they were returning here, but there's no record of the plane landing, I explained. Ryder has branches nationwide. He could be anywhere. Excellent, Hawthorne remarked, turning to Ryan. We'll need to involve the FAA and possibly the FBI. I have a contact at the local FAA office, Ryan offered. We can head there after executing a search warrant on Ryder. Hawthorne nodded in agreement. What's the next step? I inquired. If your accounts are accurate, this could escalate into a federal case since Henderson transported your wife across state lines, Ryan stated. We're considering multiple charges against him, including murder and potentially kidnapping. In the meantime, Hawthorne added, my team will continue their investigation and recover your wife's body. This process may take several days. We also plan to detain the individuals seen in the video for questioning. I nodded in acknowledgement. Ryan glanced at Hawthorne before addressing me. I'd like to speak with Mr. West privately if you don't mind, he requested. Hawthorne nodded at me. Of course. I'll step out to make a few calls. I'll be just outside, he said before exiting the room. Ryan glanced at me before proceeding. I sincerely apologize for all of this, Mr. West, he conveyed. Thank you, Detective, I responded, shaking his hand. After he departed, Ryan redirected his attention to me. Mr. West, Tom, he began. I wanted to have a private conversation with you regarding what transpired with your wife. I appreciate that, Ryan, I acknowledged. I'll spare you the graphic details, Ryan began. But based on what I've gathered, your wife's final 48 hours were utterly harrowing. I consulted with a medical examiner back east and he corroborated my suspicions. I don't believe your wife consented to what was done to her. I suspect she was subjected to a brutal assault. She was. Suffered and exploited by a group of power-hungry individuals. Look, Ryan, I understand your intentions, and I'm grateful, I responded. I truly do. But the reality is, Katie and Henderson were involved for about a month before this incident. I'm not entirely sure what transpired between them, but I have a fairly good idea. Katie could have put an end to all of this prior to last Friday, but she chose not to. I don't understand her actions, and now I never will. I understand, Ryan murmured. He retrieved a business card from his pocket and handed it to me. I suggest you consult with Dr. Harmon. She's highly reputable. Give her a call. All right, I'll do that. Thank you, I acknowledged. I'm concerned that Henderson's associates might return for you, he expressed. I would assign officers to protect you, but unfortunately our resources are limited. However, I'll instruct the dispatcher to increase patrols in your area. Do you want a firearm? No, I replied. He nodded. All right, he stated. In that case, always keep your doors and windows secured. If you suspect anything, dial emergency immediately. I'll remember that, Ryan, I assured him. Just then, Hawthorne re-entered the house. I just spoke with your partner, Johnson. He informed us Henderson is wanted nationwide, and we have search warrants ready to execute. Ryan nodded and stood up. We'll keep in touch, Tom, he said, shaking my hand. Hawthorne extended his hand. I offer my condolences for your loss, Mr. West, he conveyed. Thank you, Detective, I replied. After they departed, my parents returned and took a seat. Are you going to be all right, son? Dad inquired. I think so, Dad, I replied. I have a couple more calls to make, and I'm not particularly looking forward to them. In many ways, that's true. I needed to inform Jim about his mother's situation, and I also had to reach out to Katie's parents. Understood, Dad asked. Understood. If you need anything, just give us a call, all right? Dad reiterated. I'll do that, Dad. Thanks, I affirmed. We exchanged embraces, and I watched them depart. I dialed Jim's cell phone and left a message, anticipating it might take some time for him to return my call. The next call on my agenda was one I dreaded. Katie's father, retired Marine Colonel Bill Anderson, earned the moniker Bloody Bill for his heroic exploits in Afghanistan, allegedly dispatching multiple Taliban fighters with just a knife. His uniform boasted more ribbons and medals than I'd ever seen. He and Katie's mother, Alice, had settled in the country after his military service. I hesitated to break the news of Katie's death to the colonel, but we had a good rapport and he insisted I call him Dad. Summoning courage, I called him. Anderson residence, he answered. It's me, Tom, I said. Are you okay? He asked, sensing my distress. Not really, Dad, I replied. Katie's dead. Shocked, he demanded details. After a brief explanation, he decided they'd visit at 4 p.m., adding a quip about civilian time. Got it, Dad, I chuckled, and I'll have coffee ready. With that, we hung up, and I sank into my chair, overwhelmed by grief. My world had crumbled, my marriage had faltered, and now Katie, the love of my life, was gone. Despite my disdain for her actions, I couldn't bear the thought of her passing away, unlike Henderson, who I viewed differently. I rose and indulged in my mom's comforting lasagna, a remedy that had always eased my troubles. Cleaning up afterward, I roamed the house. Each corner triggered memories of Katie and our life together. Realizing I couldn't remain in this house, I resolved to sell it once everything settled, opting for something smaller. Discovering Katie's phone on the nightstand, I unlocked it with her familiar 4-digit code. Annoyingly, it happened at that moment. Examining her call log, I noticed repeated calls from Henderson and Brenda's workplace, particularly on Friday morning. Scanning her messages, I found an exchange with Henderson from a few months back, lacking significant context. Perusing her emails, I found nothing incriminating. Turning off the phone, I placed it back on the nightstand. Checking the time, I realized it was already 3:45 p.m. I had no clue how much time I had spent on Katie's phone. Knowing the Colonel's punctuality, I headed to the kitchen and brewed fresh coffee, strong, just the way he preferred it. As the digital clock on the coffee pot struck 4 p.m., the doorbell chimed. I knew it was the Colonel, so I welcomed him and Alice inside. "Damn it, son, didn't anyone ever teach you to duck?" the Colonel exclaimed upon seeing my face. "My father tried, but I don't think I ever fully grasped it," I half-joked. "Come in." As they entered, another car pulled into the driveway. I observed a tall, lanky man stepping out and approaching the door. "I hope you don't mind," Bill mentioned. "After what you told me, I took the liberty of calling for reinforcements." By then, the tall man had entered the house, carrying a laptop bag and 2 more bags, leaving me wondering what was happening. Bill introduced him. "Ron, this is my brother-in-law, Tom West," he said. "Tom, meet Ron Wiseman. We served together in the Corps." "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Wiseman," I greeted, shaking his hand. "Please call me Ron," he insisted. I glanced at the Colonel. "Ron and his wife have experience dealing with individuals like Henderson," the Colonel explained. "Plus, he possesses certain skills that could prove valuable." "What kind of skills?" I inquired. "I'm an accountant by profession," Ron disclosed. "An accountant?" I echoed. Ron grinned as he set his bags down. "Well, I'm a bit more than just that," he elaborated. "I'm involved with a special task force and have access to information that, as the Colonel mentioned, could be quite useful." "I see," I responded. "Well, please have a seat, and I'll fetch us some coffee." Alice joined me in the kitchen, and we returned with 4 large cups of coffee. Hot, fresh, black, and strong, just how the Colonel preferred it. Alice handed him his cup, and after a cautious sip, he remarked, "Not bad, Tom, thank you. Now, why don't you bring us all up to speed?" I recounted the events up until Ryan and Hawthorne left the house earlier. "You mentioned video recordings?" the Colonel inquired. "Yes," I confirmed. "They're quite disturbing." "I'd still like to see them," he insisted. "Don't worry, after 30 years in the Corps, there's not much that Alice and I haven't seen." I retrieved my phone and played the videos for them. They watched all 4 before I returned the phone. Bill and Alice seemed visibly upset, but Ron remained composed, pausing the videos at times to scrutinize the individuals involved. "It's evident she was medicated," Alice remarked. Bill and Ron nodded in agreement. "But with what exactly, I'm not certain," I admitted. "Brenda, Henderson's assistant, mentioned something about super ecstasy or the like." "And Henderson medicated you too?" Ron inquired. "Yes," I confirmed, but by the time I was treated at the hospital, it had already left my system. By then, Ron had set up his laptop and connected to the internet. "Those 2 thugs who attacked you," he continued. "Did you catch them on video?" "Yes," I replied. I opened one of the videos and paused it so Ron could examine it closely. "Those 2 big guys over there are Harvey Strauss and Lenny Jameson," I pointed out, indicating them in the footage. "Can you send me these videos?" Ron requested, providing his email address. "Certainly," I agreed. I forwarded the videos to him, and Ron confirmed receipt of the files and began analyzing them. "You know, those aren't their real names," Ron remarked. "No, I wasn't aware," I admitted. "What are their real identities?" "They're former criminals," Ron disclosed. "They disappeared after their boss, James Brolin, also known as Jimmy the Weasel, was found murdered in his own bed. The authorities have been searching for them for quite some time." "How long have they been working for Henderson?" "I believe it's been a couple of years now," I replied. "Why do you ask?" "They vanished around that time," Ron noted. "Are you suggesting they've made Henderson a wanted man across the nation?" "Exactly," Ron confirmed. "All right," he said, clicking his mouse. "Let's see what we can dig up." He continued working, letting his program run in the background. "So, here's the plan," the Colonel interjected. After discussing further, Ron agreed to remain with me until these individuals were neutralized. "I'm not comfortable with you being alone here while they're still out there," he expressed. "Ron, keep me posted as soon as you get any updates on them, all right?" the Colonel instructed. "I'll take it from there." "Understood, Colonel," Ron replied. "And what about you?" I inquired of Bill. "It's better if you're kept in the dark, son," he replied. "Let's just say Marines handle our own business and leave it at that. Don't worry, Henderson and his associates will face consequences one way or another." "You mentioned you're off until Monday due to illness?" he asked. "Yes," I confirmed. "What's your plan after this?" he probed. "I can't remain at Ryder after all this," I stated. "I've decided to resign, giving 2 weeks' notice starting Monday. Additionally, I'm considering selling this house and downsizing." "I can't blame you," he sympathized. "Any update on when Katie's body will be released?" "It could be several days according to what Hawthorne told me," I relayed. "But if you need assistance with final arrangements, don't hesitate to ask," he offered. Thank you, Dad. I appreciate it, I expressed. Bill rose, signaling the end of the meeting. Alice and Ron followed suit. We should head out, dear, Bill addressed Alice. Ron, keep me informed of any developments. Will do, Ron assured. Bill turned to me and embraced me, a gesture that took me by surprise. In all my years knowing him, I had never seen him hug another man. Everything will work out, son, he reassured me. Alice stepped forward after he released me and embraced me gently. I'm truly sorry for what happened, Tom, she comforted. Don't worry about a thing, all right? I won't, Mom, I assured her. Thank you for coming. You're welcome, she responded. And with that, they departed. Shortly after their departure, my phone rang. Seeing it was Jim, I answered and sat down beside him to recount the events. At first, he was taken aback by the news. Dad, that just doesn't sound like something she could do, Jim remarked. I know, it doesn't make any sense to me either, I concurred. Are there any clues as to why she did this? He inquired. No, son. I checked her phone and email, but there's nothing there, I explained. Maybe she has a burner phone somewhere, he suggested. A burner phone? I questioned. Yeah, one of those disposable gadgets you toss away after using pay-as-you-go minutes, Jim clarified. Perhaps she has one hidden that you haven't found yet. My mind immediately shifted to the videos they sent me. They originated from a number I didn't recognize. Maybe it was her burner phone. If so, then no one could trace where she is now. You might be onto something, I acknowledged. I hadn't considered that. We conversed a bit more, and Jim concluded by asking me to inform him when his mother's body would be released for burial. After the call, I mentioned the burner phone theory to Ron. That makes sense, he agreed. If you have the number, I'll see what I can uncover. I provided him with the number, and he initiated another program to trace it. A few minutes later, he had his answer. This number corresponds to a phone purchased here in the city, he reported. As you suspected, it's a burner phone. The number is registered to Ryder and was last detected Tuesday morning in NYC. There hasn't been any activity on it since you received the last video. Any idea where he might be now? I inquired. None, he replied. As far as we know, it was disassembled and disposed of in the river. He returned to his computer, prompting me to prepare a guest room upstairs since I didn't know how long he'd stay. He remained until Saturday, spending much time on the computer. While unaware of his activities, we'd grown closer since his arrival on Wednesday. He disclosed being a Marine sniper, now working for a federal private task force. Despite his background as a CPA, most of his work involved research. He shared tidbits about his and his wife Amy's interactions with executives, which intrigued me. The previous night, he requested if Amy could join for the weekend, to which I agreed. She arrived Saturday morning, and after introductions, they retreated to the guest room. Giving them space, I occupied myself in the garage for about an hour before returning inside. Ron and Amy were engrossed in something on his computer when I joined. Any updates? I inquired. Yes, Ron affirmed. Firstly, the FBI has taken over the investigation. Secondly, about half an hour ago, I received a solid hit on our targets. All three? I queried. Yeah, they're near Colorado Springs, Ron confirmed. I've already notified the colonel. Then he'll handle it himself. There's something else. What is it? I inquired. I was able to access the official autopsy report on your wife, he disclosed. What does it say? I pressed. According to the report, your wife did indeed suffer a massive heart attack from the chemicals Henderson administered, Ron revealed. But that's not what ended her life. They discovered soil particles in her lungs. What does that mean? I asked, my voice faltering. It means she was still alive when they buried her, Ron stated grimly. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Barely alive, but alive nonetheless. I'm sorry, there's more. More, I exclaimed in disbelief. There was also extensive bruising around her private parts, Ron continued. And a toxicology report revealed significant levels of various chemicals in her bloodstream, including ecstasy and cocaine. I'm sorry, Tom, but it appears the last hours of her life were brutal. I couldn't believe she willingly participated in all of this. What do you think happened? I questioned. From what I've gathered, Henderson and his cohorts likely had quite a wild party, he speculated. Your wife was so under the influence of what Henderson gave her that she lost control. At some point, she suffered a heart attack. Instead of seeking medical help, they likely presumed she was deceased, so they disposed of her by burying her. I sank into a chair, stunned by Ron's revelations. Amy approached and embraced me as tears streamed down my face. Henderson and his accomplices are wanted for murder, conspiracy to commit murder, the production and distribution of various controlled substances, and racketeering, among other charges, Ron disclosed. The other individuals in your videos have already been apprehended and charged, but Henderson is the primary target. What do you think his fate will be? I inquired. Ron shrugged. Who can say, he replied. One can only speculate about the workings of the courts these days. The next morning, I was awakened by my phone ringing. Glancing at my watch, I saw it was 4:30 a.m. I wondered who could be calling at such an hour. Answering, I heard a masked voice. Check your text messages, it instructed before hanging up. Opening the message, I found a video attached. In it, 3 naked bound men were dumped in front of a brick building. Recognizing them as Henderson, Lenny, and Harvey, I watched as a sign was hung around Henderson's neck, confessing to Katie West's murder. I pondered if the FBI would get involved. Finishing the video, I returned to sleep. 4 hours later, I descended to find Amy cooking breakfast in the kitchen. I hope you don't mind me trying my hand in your kitchen, she said. Ron gets cranky without his morning bacon. Not at all, I replied. I get a little cranky myself without bacon. Help yourself. After she finished, we all sat down to eat. As we finished, there was a knock at the door. Opening it, I found Ryan standing there. May I come in, he asked. Of course, I replied, ushering him in. Introducing him to Ron and Amy as friends of my father-in-law, I offered him coffee. No, I won't stay long, he declined. I just wanted to inform you that Henderson and 2 of his top accomplices were apprehended in Colorado Springs early this morning. That's good news, right? I inquired. Yes, he confirmed. They're talking. There are some questions about the circumstances of their capture, but I assume you're not privy to that. No, I'm not, I asserted. I've been here all night. Ron and Amy can vouch for that. Uh-huh, he responded. Well, I just wanted to keep you informed. Now I'll leave you to it. Take care of yourself. Thanks, Ryan, I expressed as he departed. Turning to Ron, I posed a question. You don't happen to know anything about this, do you? Don't ask and I won't fib, he replied with a knowing grin. I still suggest giving your father-in-law a call to express gratitude. Nodding in agreement, I retrieved my phone. Anderson, Bill greeted upon answering. Dad, just wanted to inform you that the police paid me a visit, I relayed. Henderson and his cohort were apprehended in Colorado Springs. Well, that's a relief, he responded. Ron advised me to extend my thanks, I added. Did he indeed? Bill inquired. Yes, I confirmed. So I wanted to express my appreciation. You're welcome, son, he replied warmly. I heard you received a call last night. That's correct, I affirmed. That sign was quite the touch. Do you think it gave him a lead? His grin indicated agreement. I sure hope so, he said. We'll catch up soon, son. Take care of yourself. I will, Dad, I assured. Thank you. The next Monday, I resigned from work, receiving understanding but regretful farewells. Then I visited a realtor to initiate the process of selling our longtime home, bracing myself for the emotional and logistical challenges. A week later, Katie's body was released by the New York medical examiner as her parents arranged her funeral. Despite conflicting emotions, I attended mainly to support Bill and Alice, who had been kind to me during this ordeal. Jim managed to take a break from West Point to join me at the funeral, where we shared memories and mourned together. I chose not to divulge Katie's actions to him, wanting to preserve his fond memories of her. Following the funeral, I consulted with a lawyer about potentially suing Ryder, as there seemed to be a strong case against Henderson and the board of directors, given their legal troubles. The trial against Henderson and the involved board members felt endless. The U.S. attorney pursued the death penalty for Henderson, while the defense filed numerous motions. I testified about my own experience and listened to others' testimonies. Brenda also testified, revealing that Katie wasn't the only victim of Henderson's medication and exploitation. When questioned, Brenda admitted uncertainty about whether Katie and Henderson had an affair before the incident. Video evidence suggested Katie initially rejected Henderson's advances, but later seemed to consider them. Searches of Henderson's office and home uncovered evidence of medication experimentation. Expert witnesses confirmed that many of the compounds he created were likely intended as date rape drugs. During the trial, I finally got the full story of what happened to Katie. It turned out that Henderson had kept her alive over the weekend with drugs and alcohol. At some point during their festivities, she experienced severe chest pain and collapsed, unconscious. The men claimed they checked her but couldn't find a pulse. Instead of seeking immediate medical help, which was nearby, they assumed she was dead. After cleaning her up a bit, they placed her in a car trunk and buried her in Central Park. Under questioning by the U.S. attorney, none of them admitted to having CPR training or medical qualifications. Their fate was sealed when a medical examiner found soil in her lungs matching that of the burial site, indicating she was buried alive. Some jury members visibly reacted to this revelation. At the trial's conclusion, Jake, his 2 accomplices, and everyone involved in the weekend were found guilty on all charges. The judge opted against the death penalty, sentencing Jake to life in prison, along with Lenny and Harvey. Others received slightly lighter prison terms. Civil lawsuits against Ryder and Henderson followed the criminal trial. The company lost most of its customers and went into receivership. Henderson, after paying a substantial sum, filed for bankruptcy. The fallout from Henderson's scheme to betray me was far-reaching. Katie was dead, and he and his cohorts were bankrupt and imprisoned. The company vanished, leaving hundreds unemployed. As for me, life moved forward. I sold the house and bought a 2-bedroom apartment. Closing the door on the house for the last time was bittersweet. However, I had my whole life ahead of me. My advisor suggested taking some time off, maybe a cruise to meet someone new. So, I booked a round-the-world cruise and headed to the airport, excited for the adventures that lay ahead.
Caught my wife cheating through Chromecast, exposed her in court, ruining her job and reputation. We've been married for 22 years and have one son, 19. Like any marriage, we've had scuffles here and there, but nothing we couldn't get over. In fact, I felt like we had a great marriage with great communication, mutual attraction, and a satisfying sex life. We both share a love for the outdoors, so we were constantly on the go and staying active, hiking, camping, or just taking long walks. We've always taken care of ourselves and made an effort to stay in pretty good shape because we talked about growing old together and being able to do things when we're old and gray. I work as a paramedic, and over the last 9 months, my shifts had gotten a bit turned around. I've had to work mainly night shifts and picked up a lot of extra shifts. She works as a litigation consultant and has been working from home for a little less than a year. When my wife made the transition to work from home, it wasn't her idea. Her firm actually moved toward liquid talent, and she told me everyone started working from home. But I remember her making a big stink about it, saying she wasn't going to be able to see her clients and colleagues face-to-face as much, which makes building relationships and trust so hard. I remember her being strongly against it, so much so that she was debating leaving her work. Trust? How ironic. Remember this for later. Anyway, my night shifts made things a bit distant between us since our schedules suddenly didn't really overlap anymore. Although she'd be at home working, I'd be sleeping, and when I'd be getting ready to go to work, I thought she was settling in for the night and getting ready for bed. But when we were both off at the same time, or our schedules matched up nicely, we seemed to be just fine. We were close, we played around, we had fun with each other. There was nothing out of the ordinary or anything that tipped me off that something was going on behind my back. Our marriage felt fine. She talked to me about her week. She texted me during the day while I was sleeping, telling me that she missed me or saw something funny and thought of me. She made me meals that I'd eat when I woke up, and she packed me lunch. Recently, my brother came over to help me install a Chromecast I got through a contest at work. It happened to be a random day off I had, and my brother was in town from his shift work. I hadn't seen him in a while, so I decided to ask him for some help with this. We were having fun, taking turns connecting our phones to the TV, watching videos and listening to music, just messing around. My wife came out from her office after she was done with her work and asked what we were doing. I told her that he was helping connect my phone to the TV for our new Chromecast. I asked her if she wanted my brother to help her download the app on her phone so she could use it too. She hesitated at first, looked at the TV, then looked back at me, and I said, "It's super simple, you just have to download an app, takes like 2 seconds. Finally, she caved, but it looked like she was texting someone or going through her phone right before she passed it to my brother. At the time, I didn't really think anything of it. My brother started going through the process of connecting her phone and getting it recognized, and she asked how long it was going to take. My brother said something like, maybe 2 minutes, and she was like, "Okay, I'm just going to go to the washroom quick." Before she walked away, she turned back around and said, "You're just downloading an app, right?" And he said, "Yeah." So she left to go to the washroom, and my brother and I were having drinks on the couch, not really paying attention while he was going through these easy steps to connect the thing. Not even 10 seconds after that, he connected her phone to the screen. As a joke, he opened up her messages, and there was a contact named just a heart emoji. He looked at me and started laughing, thinking he was going to find something juicy in there between her and me. I was like, be your discretion advised, and he started scrolling through this thread, seeing some pretty raunchy things being said back and forth. He called me cheeky, a dirty dog, and said he didn't know I had it in me. I will say it wasn't beyond my wife and me to say some pretty interesting things to one another while she was getting ready for bed, and I was just starting my shift, so at first I did think this was a message thread between the two of us. But as I looked closer at the thread, I realized this wasn't between me and my wife. At one point, she started calling this guy Craig. At another point, there were some nudes exchanged, and let's just say that the male extremity definitely wasn't mine. My brother saw my reaction, started scrolling slowly this time, trying to read whatever he could, and then realized the same thing. My stomach dropped, and my brother stopped laughing. The text basically read something about a certain body part of Craig's being in my wife's mouth. My brother got up, handed me the phone, and suddenly told me he had to go and quickly left. I didn't blame him. I got up, started videoing what I was seeing on the screen, and as I heard the toilet flush, I exited the messages, dropped the phone on the couch, and quickly ran out onto our porch to make it look like I had been sitting out there the entire time. After about 5 minutes or so, she came onto the porch and asked me how long I'd been outside. I told her my brother and I went to sit out there as soon as she left the living room. She looked relieved and then played it off like nothing happened and sat down next to me. I got up to walk back inside to pretend to grab another beer and saw that she had disconnected her phone from the TV. And now it was just a black screen. This was eating me alive. I had to go on a quick run after that just to wrap my head around what I saw and blow off some steam. I was also trying to think of ways I could get back on her phone again to send those messages to myself and see how far this really went. For some reason, I just had to see more. Later that night, I came up with this BS excuse that I had to re-download the app on her phone because something went wrong with the Chromecast. She's not necessarily all that tech-savvy. She usually makes me do anything tech-related around the house. Whenever it comes to the internet, or she thinks I can diagnose anything to do with the TV, the internet, or our phones, she makes me download coupon apps and little whirly things on her phone. So, I knew if I said something like, I need to download something, she'd likely believe me and give me the phone back. Later that night, I was pretending to screw around with the TV before she went for her bath. Just as she got in the bath, I came in and said, I've got to re-download this app on your phone because I accidentally unplugged something and it just effed up everything. She looked at me a bit worried and said, I don't really need to be connected to it. And I said, it'll take me 2 minutes, super easy. Then you just have it on your phone and we don't have to worry about it later. She said, I'll get out of the bath and help. And I said, no, you had a long day. Just sit back and relax. I'll be 2 seconds. She reluctantly handed me her phone, looking concerned, then told me to be careful and not to go through anything else because she had some confidential client information on there. I kind of came back and said, why are you leaving client conversations on your personal phone when you have something set up on your computer for that? She told me that the system on her laptop was down for a bit, so she had to use her cell. Yeah, whatever. I told her, no worries, I'm just downloading this app and then reconnecting it. She asked if I should call my brother back and if I'm capable of doing that myself. But she said this in a way that really rubbed me the wrong way, as if she was telling me that I'm weak or something or not good enough. Either way, I felt like it was a dig at me. I told her if I had any problems, I'd call him, and I walked out of the bathroom. We've never been ones to snoop on each other's phones. Up until this moment, I felt like I never had to. We've always known the passwords to each other's phones, but never once have I ever snooped or checked in on what she was doing. I've always trusted her implicitly, and yeah, I guess since she's worked from home, she's been a bit more protective of it, but I chalked that up to just work, or maybe work was getting a bit overwhelming. So she was just playing mindless games on it to decompress. Turns out she was decompressing with someone else other than me, with someone else in her mouth right under my nose, right as I was. Sleeping during the day or working my butt off for us in the wee hours of the morning, trying to bring junkies back to life downtown. I felt like an absolute schmuck. I honestly 100% had no idea that anything was going on, and I feel like a fool for not seeing it, or even letting it happen. I had to work fast, but I managed to scroll far back enough to see that the communication between my wife and Craig started last May, which was over a year ago. I screen recorded what I could so I could just go back and pause and read later, and I sent it to myself via email, then deleted it from her photos, videos, and her sent box. Meanwhile, she's yelling at me from the bathroom, asking if everything is okay because I reached the 5-minute mark by this time, and I'm trying to play it cool, saying that I'm having a problem with my phone. And she's asking me to bring her phone back. I go bring her phone back, and she asks if everything is okay, and I'm like, yeah, figured it out, and I walked back into the living room. From there, I went through this video that I sent myself, reading just months' worth of filth. My son no longer lives in the house with us. He lives with his buddies in a condo downtown, so I thought my wife was alone in the evenings while I was working. Nope. This guy Craig would come over and they'd have their way with each other while I was at work. Not only that, but he even snuck over while I was asleep in bed. This was also rough to read. I ended up finding out Craig's last name from his Instagram page because she follows him on Instagram, where, by the way, they send each other sexy memes, lingerie ads, and what have you. From there, I looked up Craig and quickly found that he's an attorney for a firm that my wife does work for. He started in March of last year. He looked like a pretty young guy, maybe in his late 30 seconds, early 40 seconds. Already, I went back to the screen recording and went through it slowly. It looks like she broke the news to Craig that she'd be working from home around the same time she told me. She was upset about the fact that she wasn't going to see him during the week at all. This looked earlier on in whatever sort of thing they had going on, but from there, it quickly progressed because he said that he'd have to take her out for drinks and they could catch up there. Then, shortly after I started working nights and extra shifts, she told him that he could come over for lunch or start coming over because her husband, also known as me, was sleeping, but that they'd have to be quiet. I was sick to my stomach reading this. Now I'm here. It's been a few days since D-Day, and I'm trying to think of my next move, but I just wanted to write this out and see if anyone has some good advice out there. I really don't want to get screwed on this. I mean, my wife works for law firms, knows her crap, and knows people who can really take everything from me. I just have to be careful here. This whole thing just has me really effed up. Well, it looks like the Chromecast wasn't the only thing getting connected in your house. Your wife really took liquid talent to a whole new level, didn't she? At least now you know why her texting got so enthusiastic during your night shifts. On the bright side, she did make sure to pack your lunch, just not the kind you were expecting. And hey, maybe next time your Chromecast contest prize will come with a disclaimer about uncovering family secrets instead of just streaming shows. Update 1, D-Day +7, I met with a lawyer. Before I get into that, I just wanted to give thanks to everyone who reached out and lent some advice and some tough love. I needed to hear all of it. So yeah, I met with a lawyer. First off, I ended up calling my brother and telling him what else I found, and he's been a really great support system through all of this. He actually reminded me of the friends that my soon-to-be ex-wife and I made through her work. It's a husband and wife who run their own firm. My soon-to-be ex used to do some consulting for them a few years back. They were close enough that they would come over for dinner every now and again. And we went out for dinner a couple of different times, maybe a Christmas party here and there. But we ended up not seeing or hearing from them too much after my soon-to-be ex's contract ended with their firm, which was maybe a year ago. My brother encouraged me to reach out and said that I just needed to be honest with them. He said that if my soon-to-be ex was good enough to work for them, it meant they were good at what they did. He was right. So I reached out to the husband and told him exactly what was happening, but asked that he keep this just between the two of us, because I didn't really know the relationship that my soon-to-be ex had with the wife still, and if they were close, I didn't want to risk her finding out. Anyway, he got back to me right away and basically laid everything out for me. He told me to send him the video of the text thread between her and Craig. He said to send him copies of financial documents, account statements, and whatever else. He told me to open up separate accounts that I should start depositing my money into, and to try to take out money here and there from our joint account until things go down, but to not make it suspicious. He said since our son is 19 and living on his own, I don't have to worry about custody or anything like that, and once the papers are served to her, to consider living arrangements, who's going where and who's staying where. I told him that I wanted to keep the house. He said just not to discuss divorce details or badmouth her or anything like that. I haven't named names other than Craig, so I feel like we're good here. She doesn't even know what Reddit is, as far as I know. But yeah, the papers are getting made up. My wife makes significantly more money than I do. He said I may be entitled to alimony or spousal or support. We have a few investments, but those were actually made separately, so she can't take any of mine and I'm not entitled to any of hers. We don't actually have any debts either. She paid off her student loan long ago. And I didn't have any loans like that. The biggest thing we own together is the house, which I love. We've lived in it for 12 years, and I really don't want to have to get rid of it if I don't have to. But I know I can't afford it on my own. Your wife's secret rendezvous have turned your home into a battleground for asset separation instead of Netflix binging. At least you're taking advice from the husband-wife lawyer duo who know all about balancing dinner parties with legal disputes. Who knew those dinner parties and Christmas gatherings would now serve as background for potential divorce negotiations? It's like leveraging your own version of Law & Order, Domestic Edition. And hey, with no debts and separate investments, it sounds like you got a decent hand in this poker game of asset division. Hang in there with the house negotiations, OP. It's the centerpiece of your 12-year saga, after all. Maybe it'll be the one thing that doesn't get Chromecast 8 out of your life. Update 2, D-Day +12, the papers were served to my ex. I told her I wasn't leaving the house and that she had to leave. She told me this was basically her office, and I said she could find somewhere else to work. I told her she wasn't working half the time anyway. She was inviting Craig over and effing him while her own husband lay in bed a few feet away. She tried to threaten me and told me that I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but the threats were empty because I knew she was just scared. She knew exactly who my lawyer was. After that, I told her that she had to break the news to our son. I told her that she had to tell him everything, and I said he had to hear it from her, or else I'd show him the thread of messages between her and Craig. He completely sided with me. My ex tried to apologize to him, but he didn't seem to have it. He actually encouraged her to move out of the house to give Dad some space, and after that, she packed up and moved out. My son has also been incredible through all of this. He's checking in on me almost every day, and we've been seeing a lot more of each other, which has been nice. Here's where things get a little juicy. What I didn't know when I contacted my attorney was that he was one of the best family law attorneys in the country. But my wife apparently knew because she tried to contact me, apologize, and take back everything, to which I said it was too late for any of that. What was really interesting was when she said that she and Craig would pay me to be silent because it would ruin their careers. She said that she really messed up and didn't know how to fix things, but desperately wanted to fix things with me. My lawyer actually let me in on something. I guess while my ex was working for him, she started getting cozy with a partner at the firm and leaking information. They found out and they weren't going to have that. So they gracefully dissolved the relationship and then terminated her contract. I guess the consulting firm that my ex worked for caught wind of this and wasn't okay with it either. Because they know their way around the legal system, I mean, it's their job. It took them a while to give her a slap on the wrist, but once they did, her punishment was, drumroll please, having her work from home, basically house arrest. So everything she's been telling me has been a lie. Her firm never went to Liquid Talent, and her contract never ended naturally with my attorney. They terminated it. And it all makes sense now why we stopped hearing from them and seeing them out of nowhere. I just thought it might have been awkward after the contract ended, but little did I know. It was awkward for an entirely different reason. Looks like your house went from a love nest to a legal battlefield faster than you can say objection. Your ex-wife trying to claim your house was her office. Classic move. Did she also try to bill you for her services rendered to Craig? At least your son's siding with you. And your ex's attempt to buy your silence with Craig? That's some serious hush money. Though I guess it's hard to put a price on not torpedoing your career with scandalous messages. Turns out she wasn't just working from home, she was serving a sentence for office espionage. Update 3. Well, we settled. She ended up giving me a large lump sum of money instead of months of alimony, which I used to buy out what was left on the house and then some. So, the house is now officially mine, thank goodness. She tried really desperately to get back with me until the very end. So much so that I had to tell my attorney, and then communication was moved to only between attorneys. It just got too weird, and I wasn't having it. I wasn't interested in getting back together or trying to make things work because of what was going down with Craig. She ended up losing that contract with that firm too, and now she's under investigation. Rumor is that she's been aiding attorneys in breaching attorney-client privilege. Some colleagues or clients started noticing irregularities in information handling and discrepancies in case details or unusual access to confidential information. There were recorded conversations, messages, and emails that were shared without the proper authorization. I guess in layman's terms, that means she knew things she shouldn't have and then told that to attorneys for the benefit of their case. So now a formal investigation was launched with the State Bar Association for breaching attorney-client privilege and other violations. But that's not the best part. This all traveled within the legal community, which led to rumors about different practices involving unethical actions. It's just a giant effing mess. But I'm laughing. She did it to herself. I'm out of there, and I have my house and the best son a father could ever ask for. Buying out the house and then some, that's like winning the lottery. But instead of champagne showers, it's house keys. And I'm finally free celebrations, and now she's under investigation for breaching attorney-client privilege. Here's to being out of the mess and having a house to call your own with your awesome son by your side. Maybe your next contest prize will be a drama-free vacation, where the only legal drama involves beach permits. What do you make of this? And thank you for joining us today. Be sure to like and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. Until next time.
I find myself in a situation that I used to only see in YouTube videos about infidelity. I used to watch these videos for entertainment, never imagining that I'd be in a similar spot myself. It all began when I received an unusual envelope in the mail. What caught my attention was the absence of a return address, and it had 2 stamps in the upper right corner. The handwritten address made me think it might be from an old military buddy trying to reconnect. When I opened it, the letter was addressed to Mr. Unknown, which I'm using to replace my name. Here's what the letter said. Dear Mr. Unknown, I'm sending you this anonymous letter to let you know that your wife has been having an affair with Mr. Bossman, who is involved with multiple women. I read the letter multiple times. The author wanted to remain anonymous and wanted me to know that my wife was having an affair with her supervisor. The mention of multiple women likely meant that the supervisor was involved with more than one woman. I had seen her supervisor once when I dropped my wife off at work. He was a tall guy, around 6'4" or 6'5", bald, below average in looks, and out of shape, resembling a heavier golem. I knew my wife's type, and he didn't fit it. To give some context, during my time in the military, I focused on endurance training. But about 6 months before leaving, I decided to start lifting weights because I was tired of feeling fatigued during workouts. I gained 20 pounds of muscle. It may sound conceited, but my physical appearance improved significantly. However, at 5'9", I didn't consider myself a Don Juan. Nonetheless, with my new physique, I noticed a substantial increase in attention from women. They would check me out discreetly, and one of my wife's friends even subtly showed interest once. My wife, who was the jealous type, never seemed to notice any of this. As a religious person, I never took advantage of these opportunities or flaunted them to boost my ego. I didn't flirt or have affairs. It was just a confidence boost. My wife's only comment was, "If your neck disappears, you need to stop," which was a bit underwhelming but made me believe she loved me for who I was, not just my body. Returning to the letter, I took it with a grain of salt since there was no concrete evidence. Confronting my wife wouldn't help because if she denied it, what else could I do? I lacked evidence, and if there truly was an affair, confronting her without proof would drive it underground. Suspicion alone wasn't enough, as voicing my suspicions would make her think I didn't trust her. What if I was mistaken? Having solid evidence was crucial. Let me provide some background about us. I'm 35 years old, and my wife is 33. We met in college and got married shortly after. I also enlisted in the military, and during our time together, we had 3 kids, a 9-year-old boy and 2 girls aged 7 and 5. My wife was a stay-at-home mom, taking care of our 3 children. I'm confident that she remained faithful throughout my military service. We had a great group of friends who supported her when I was deployed. Contrary to the stereotype of cheating spouses during deployments, it's challenging to keep such things hidden, although it does happen. To cut a long story short, I was rarely at home during my last posting, and as I continued to advance in rank, it was only going to get worse. So, I decided to leave the military. After serving for 10 years, I made the choice to leave. Typically, this is a pivotal moment in a military career because it doesn't make financial sense to leave after this point. Military orders are typically at least 3 years, and retirement occurs after 20 years. I made this decision to start over in the corporate world from the bottom up, primarily to be a more present father for my children, as I hadn't spent much time with them before and had never changed a diaper. Regarding my decision to leave the military, my wife wasn't thrilled about it at all. In short, she doesn't handle uncertainty well and felt comfortable in the life we had built together in the military, despite her complaints about my frequent absences. Now that I'm no longer in the military, she presented me with a long list of demands regarding where we should live, how much money I needed to earn, and other factors to make her feel comfortable and ensure security for her and our kids. She cried a lot during this period. As everyone knows, you have to go where the job opportunities are, but I did my best to meet her criteria, and we were incredibly fortunate in the civilian world. I fulfilled all her requirements. I secured a job in the right state, within driving distance of my parents, who she loves. I'm earning what military personnel would consider a significant income, in the 6 figures. We're in an area with excellent public schools and low homeowner association fees, where everyone is polite. Oh, and did I mention that she had always complained about not being able to start her career because we moved so frequently in the military, which is true. She expressed her desire to utilize her degree in logistics and supply chain management. She began her job search, and within 3 months, she landed her dream job, if you can call it that. She works at a distribution center where all her colleagues are women, and they report to a male supervisor, the bald man I mentioned earlier. While her job doesn't pay much, it's the job she always wanted, and her first since graduating from college. I supported her 100% in pursuing this opportunity, as I do for everything she chooses to do, which she has since acknowledged. Since I received this letter, I've been trying to collect evidence to confirm its authenticity. If the person wanted to expose her boss, why didn't they report it to HR? Why tell me instead? Nonetheless, I kept a close eye on my wife. I knew her cell phone password, so I checked her messages, and I did find texts with her boss, but their conversations were pretty ordinary, and they didn't text much. That letter bothered me for almost a week, and I couldn't find any proof of my wife being unfaithful. She's been at her job for 5 months now, and the only noticeable change is that our intimacy has decreased. She's been turning down Zex for the past 2 months, but I can't accuse her of cheating just because she's not in the mood. She always has excuses like her job becoming more stressful or her feeling tired. Despite searching for evidence for 2 weeks, I came up empty-handed, but I remained vigilant for any hints. I often wondered about the sender of that letter and considered it might be a prank. At one point, I almost mentioned it to my wife as a joke, but I decided against it. I was about to close that strange chapter and accept that our intimacy wouldn't be as frequent as before. However, one night, my wife talked about her job and mentioned how her female coworkers were jealous of the attention she was getting from her boss. She said they envied her because she had received the best quarterly reviews and been recognized as the Employee of the Month 3 times already, despite her relatively short time there. She was genuinely excited about the recognition, and initially, I was happy for her since she hadn't experienced a real job before. But that letter kept coming back to my mind. For some reason, her statement sparked my curiosity. I wondered, could it be that one of her coworkers is so jealous that they sent me that letter? And more importantly, why were they so envious of her recognition? While it's common for women to be jealous of each other, this seemed a bit extreme. I became suspicious again and considered hiring a private investigator to track my wife. However, I changed my mind at the last minute because I didn't want to waste money in case I was wrong. After all, I didn't have any strong evidence or a valid reason to be suspicious. There were no incriminating text messages, just that mysterious letter, her reduced interest in intimacy, and her newfound enthusiasm for her job. It all seemed pretty normal, right? So, I decided to purchase a GPS tracker online to install in her car and monitor any unusual places she might go. The GPS tracker I bought was the type that easily fits into the OBDI port beneath the steering column. I was nervous because it's quite visible, but my wife isn't very tech-savvy. I figured I could easily come up with an excuse if she happened to notice it, especially since I often handle car maintenance. I could just tell her it's related to a fuse or something, and she'd believe me. I wouldn't really recommend this kind of GPS tracker for any covert operation, like the one I was about to undertake. It was a Friday, and I was eager to see what the GPS would reveal. At lunchtime, I noticed her car was parked in an unfamiliar location. It wasn't her workplace, the grocery store, or our kids' school. It was on the other side of town, a place we rarely visited. I decided to Google the location and discovered it was a hotel. I immediately requested permission from my boss to leave work and headed towards the GPS location, which was about 35 miles away from my job. When I was about 25 miles into the drive, with only 10 miles left to reach the location, I noticed the GPS signal was moving away from that spot. I was tracking the signal using an app on my phone. I sped up, but I could see the GPS signal heading back towards her workplace. Her car had been at that location for around 3 hours, and I had just missed her. I felt so disappointed. I got out of my car and looked around the area, trying to figure out if her car was parked at a Best Western hotel or the nearby restaurant. Another thought crossed my mind. Maybe she was out eating with her coworkers because the restaurant and hotel were next to each other. But it seemed strange for her to travel this far just for a restaurant when there were plenty of options between her workplace and that location. It's not like she was a big fan of Golden Corral, willing to drive 27 miles for a meal. That day, I returned home with numerous questions but no answers. My wife noticed that something was bothering me when I got home, but I lied and told her I had a tough day at work. I made an effort not to confront her, but I still felt like I lacked sufficient evidence to do so. Consequently, I decided it was time to hire a private investigator because I couldn't keep checking my phone and leaving work to track her down and catch her cheating. On Saturday, I spoke with a private investigator who charged $25 an hour. He wasn't a licensed investigator, but rather a person with a good camera phone whom I found on Craigslist. I agreed to pay him to follow my wife during her lunch hours. His services weren't too expensive since he only worked during those hours. The private investigator also installed a GPS tracking app on his phone, allowing him to see what I could see. I informed him about the incident involving the Best Western and Golden Corral and showed him the location. Monday through Thursday passed without any noteworthy events. Everything was routine. Then on Friday, the private investigator alerted me to some movement. He texted me that my wife was driving toward the location of the Best Western, and he was tailing her. I opened the app to confirm his report. Since he knew her destination, he went ahead of her and arrived there before her. When my wife got there, she went alone into the hotel. The private investigator took photos of her entering the hotel and followed her inside. He was also aware of her boss, as I had described him, so he knew what he looked like in the car he drove. The private investigator sat in the hotel lobby and discreetly recorded my wife entering the elevator. He managed to join her in the elevator, which was a risky move as it could have blown his cover if she had seen him multiple times and recognized him. I suppose you get what you pay for. The private investigator noticed that she got off the elevator on the 3rd floor and recorded everything. He didn't follow her out of the elevator on the 3rd floor, but returned to the lobby and waited. About 3 hours later, he saw her boss exit the elevator, go to the front desk, check out of the hotel, and head to his car. He recorded the entire sequence. 10 minutes later, my wife emerged from the elevator, went directly to her car, and the private investigator captured this on tape as well. My suspicions were confirmed. She was cheating on me with that bald guy. I now had all the evidence I needed to confront her. The private investigator sent me all the recordings and pictures to my Dropbox. I compiled them into one video and came home early before she did, with my laptop and the envelope I mentioned earlier in my post. If you were to inquire about my feelings at that moment, I would say I felt surprisingly calm because I had been mentally preparing myself for this exact situation. When she returned home, I summoned her to the kitchen. My laptop was on the countertop, where I had compiled the recordings into a 30-minute video that showcased her arrival at the hotel, exiting the elevator, and her boss emerging shortly after, followed by her. I presented the video to her, and within less than 2 minutes of watching, she fully comprehended its content. She turned to me with an apologetic expression and uttered, "I can explain." Tears welled up in her eyes as she repeated, "I'm sorry." I silenced her and pointed at the screen, urging her to keep watching. Despite her attempts to turn around and explain herself, even attempting to get me to stop the video, my anger grew, and I grabbed her by the back of her hair, forcing her to face the laptop. I pointed at the screen and harshly told her to keep watching, "You know what you did," as she cried softly and continued to watch. I held her hair throughout the entire video, and she continued to sob and tremble. I could tell from the fear in her eyes that she was terrified of me, as she had never seen me this furious before. I must clarify that I am not a violent person, and I had never laid a hand on her or any other woman in such a manner before. However, I made an exception on that particular day. After we finished watching the video, I forcefully pushed her to the floor, causing her to fly across the room. I had a strong urge to physically harm her, and I yelled at her, accusing her of sleeping with her boss just 5 months into her new job, and who knows how many others. She responded through tears, claiming it was the only time she had cheated. I asked her how long it had been going on, and she confessed that it had been 2 months. She stated that she didn't care about him. The sexual encounter meant nothing to her, and she couldn't explain why she had done it. I yelled at her, demanding that she start talking, or I would resort to violence. She confessed to everything, admitting that she wasn't genuinely attracted to him, but because other women were interested in him, she wanted him too, almost like it was a competition. I believe it had to do with him being the male boss in a predominantly female workplace. According to her, he was involved with other women as well. I couldn't comprehend how my once beautiful wife was involved with this guy who resembled Gollum. She was doing so merely because other women were interested in or already involved with him. It seemed like she had forgotten that she was married while engaging with this guy and denying her husband intimacy. What kind of world were we living in? It appeared that she was with him more out of competition than anything else. I was extremely upset, and words couldn't express it. I felt like my previously pristine image of my wife had been tarnished. That night, I called her derogatory names and told her I didn't want to see her again. I kicked her out of the house because I couldn't stand the sight of her, and she went to stay with a friend. That night was incredibly stressful because I had to feed and put my kids to bed, and I didn't know where anything was in the house. I was running around like a headless chicken, trying to resist calling my wife because my 5-year-old was crying. My wife had always been the stay-at-home mom and more involved in my kids' lives than I was. I was the breadwinner, and she was the homemaker. I thought we made a great team until now. She had destroyed everything because she was trying to compete with other women, disregarding the fact that she was married. She displayed very immature behavior. According to her, the female employees working under this guy, Gollum, were throwing themselves at him, even those who were married. It was a competition among grown women, married women, which was baffling to me. Grown women were acting like college girls, and I suspected that one of these women might have sent me that letter. Why would grown women compete to be involved with an unattractive, troll-like man? This guy disgusted me, taking advantage of his female employees and turning their workplace into a disgraceful mess. I want to get a divorce, and I want her to suffer the consequences of this betrayal. However, I had relied on her to maintain our home, so it would undoubtedly take some adjustment. My unfaithful wife has been texting and calling me since yesterday, seeking permission to return home. I didn't get much sleep last night, and I have to go to work this morning. She knows where everything our kids need, including their medication, is kept. My 7-year-old daughter requires special attention due to allergies and being selective about things, which my wife is good at handling. My 5-year-old daughter can also be challenging to take care of. I dropped my kids off at school and left work early to pick them up. It wasn't as bad as I expected, but I was quite tired. During this time, I haven't been responding to my wife's texts or calls. That evening, I called her back and told her to come home. When she arrived that night, it surprised me because she came with her older sister, perhaps out of fear of being alone with me. Her sister lives 90 miles away from us. My wife must have confided in her about her infidelity and sought her support. My sister-in-law, married young, is now divorced and bears a striking resemblance to my wife. They could be mistaken for twins, but she's 2 years older, and we've always gotten along well. She's more knowledgeable and respectful compared to my wife. My sister-in-law and I have had a good relationship for as long as we've known each other. My wife is the spoiled one in the family, and her older sister often has to clean up her messes. While I wasn't in the mood for reconciliation or playing nice with my wife, I was glad to see a friendly face. Even though I thought my sister-in-law would always be behind her sister, family bonds are strong. I appreciated her coming to mediate for my wayward wife, as she could relate to what I was going through due to her own experience with her husband's infidelity, which led to their divorce. My sister-in-law took me aside and explained that she wasn't there for my wayward wife, but for the sake of the kids. She acknowledged that my wife could be immature and suggested that, for the children's well-being, I should allow my wife back into the house. We could try an in-house separation and see how things develop from there. After our conversation, I have to admit that my sister-in-law has a way with words because she managed to calm me down enough to tolerate my wayward wife's presence. I glanced at my wife, who was sitting in the corner with a red face and swollen eyelids, as if she had been crying for days, trying to avoid making eye contact with me. It gave me some satisfaction that she understood the impact of her betrayal on me. When my kids emerged from their room and welcomed her, it eased the tense atmosphere and warmed my heart. I truly wish she hadn't betrayed me and had remained faithful. Seeing her with my kids was something I cherished because she was an excellent mother, but not so great as a wife. We lived in a 3-bedroom apartment, so my wayward wife and her sister shared the guest bedroom, while the kids stayed in the 3rd bedroom. My wayward wife came out of the bedroom after putting my kids to bed and began cooking dinner, while I sat on the living room couch with my sister-in-law watching TV. As my sister-in-law started talking to me, I could sense her intention. She was trying to divert my attention from my wife's affair, or make everything seem normal. Deep down, I wanted things to return to normal, to go back to the way they used to be. I was tired of being angry and exhausted, taking care of the kids alone and handling my job without my wayward wife. I needed a distraction, and her sister was quite chatty. While my wayward wife was in the kitchen, my sister-in-law mentioned that she would leave the next morning, but would stay longer if needed. I told her that I was likely going to get a divorce because I couldn't look at my wife the same way or trust her anymore. My sister-in-law understood and didn't try to persuade me otherwise. After my wife finished cooking dinner, she served both of us without making eye contact or saying a word. The next morning, my sister-in-law departed, and we continued with our daily routine. I still wasn't speaking to my wayward wife, and she didn't seem to be getting ready for work that day, but I didn't inquire about it. In the afternoon, I consulted a divorce lawyer to explore my options. The lawyer mentioned that based on my wife's income, I might have to pay alimony and child support. It seemed absurd because she was only earning $45,000 a year, and she had cheated with her boss. Cheating with a superior, especially when in a committed relationship, is never acceptable. Perhaps her newfound financial independence, as it was her first job since college, had played a role in her actions. However, she had clearly taken it too far. I didn't have an issue with providing alimony and child support, as I had essentially done that during my military service when I earned less. It wasn't about the money, it was a matter of principle. If she could cheat on me with her first career boss, what would stop her from doing the same with another person in authority in the future? When I returned home that night, I spoke to my wife for the first time since D-Day. She had written a letter that she wanted to read to me. She explained that she wanted to express her thoughts without getting emotional. As she read the letter, all she said was how sorry she was. She carefully avoided mentioning the Gollum guy and simply apologized for betraying my trust and behaving immaturely. She expressed her desire for us to stay together and her willingness to do anything to repair our marriage. Surprisingly, she also mentioned something unexpected. She said I could sleep with other women if I wanted to. This revelation caught me off guard because my wife had always been the jealous type. I doubted her sincerity and told her that I didn't need her permission to be with other women because she had forfeited the right to have an opinion on that matter. I believed she was using this offer to manipulate me and alleviate her guilt if I acted on it. I interrupted her and clarified that I had no interest in being with other women, and if I were, I wouldn't have married her in the first place. This made her burst into tears, but I insisted that she hadn't explained why she had deceived me for 2 months. It wasn't a one-time mistake. It was premeditated and deliberate. She planned to go to the hotel and engage in a secret affair with this disgusting guy, risking a lot for what? I informed her that we were getting a divorce, and my mind was already made up. I added that despite her physical attractiveness, I couldn't stand sleeping with her or having her near me. She kept asking, "Why are you being so cruel to me?" I had spoiled my wife, treated her like a princess throughout our relationship, never raised my voice, always pampered her, allowed her to make all the rules at home, and gave her control over our household. She had grown accustomed to it. I treated her well and never mistreated her. Perhaps that's why she ended up with the first guy who ordered her around, thinking I would continue being the same nice guy even after she had an affair with her boss. It's unbelievable. And there's more. She also informed me that she had quit her job because she couldn't bear being there and seeing her former boss's face. She said she had everything with me but managed to throw it all away because she thought she could fit in with her coworkers. She claimed she wasn't sure how it had escalated to sexual interaction. Despite my disgust at the thought of her boss, I couldn't shake the question of how a guy who looked like a golem could seduce a woman as attractive as my wife and make her forget her vows. I questioned her persistently, wanting to know why she had fallen for him. She struggled and stumbled over her words while attempting to answer my question. She admitted that she had been grappling with the same question herself, trying to understand how she had become involved with this guy and why she kept going back for more. She emphasized that it wasn't even because the sex was enjoyable. She sarcastically remarked that it certainly wasn't about his looks. The only reason she could come up with was a combination of several factors. He was skilled with words and very articulate. He always seemed to have the right response at the right time, as if he had the answer to every question. His position of authority played a role because the fact that all the girls looked up to him and tried to impress him made him appear more attractive. While the reasons she provided seemed nuanced and well thought out, all I could think about was how much I would enjoy disrupting this Gollum guy's party over there. I informed my wayward wife that I intended to expose him. At this point, my wife expressed a willingness to do anything to make me happy, even if we were heading for divorce. She couldn't stand seeing me upset with her. I told her that I wanted to expose the Gollum to his spouse. I explained that, although she had been foolish to let this guy take advantage of her, he needed to be exposed, and it was time for me to seek revenge against him for destroying my family. My wife disclosed where he lived and his wife's name. I asked her how they had been communicating without using text messages, and she revealed that they had been using her work email messenger. I pressed my wayward wife to log into the work messenger and show me the messages. She hesitated and believed it wouldn't be a good idea because it would only further aggravate me. She also expressed fear that I might harm her if she showed me the messages. I continued to insist, but she insisted that since I had decided to proceed with the divorce, she would show me the messages when it was finalized, and we were separated. A few days later, I managed to locate the Gollum's wife. By the way, the Gollum was 51 years old, and his wife is 48. I conducted a background check on him to find out where he lived. He had 4 children, with the youngest being 12 years old. I made an additional copy of the video and saved it on a thumb drive. Then, I went to the golem's house when I knew he was still at work, probably involved with another one of his employees. I knocked on his door and his wife answered. I believe she was the only one home at the time. I explained my story to her and handed over the flash drive containing the evidence, along with the anonymous letter that had been sent to me. She revealed that she had received a similar letter and confronted her husband about it. However, he denied any wrongdoing and accused the women at work of being lazy and hating him because he insisted they do their jobs properly. He had convinced his wife that these women were trying to destroy his life, and she believed him. She had never considered hiring a private investigator or suspected anything was amiss. The golem's wife was very grateful for the information I provided, and I left her my contact information as well. She expressed her thanks for my service to the country, and we said our goodbyes. I'm not certain if they ultimately got a divorce or separated, but at least he now knows that I'm aware of his actions. Last week, I submitted all the evidence I had to the HR department. I spoke with a lady on the phone, and she invited me to come by in person. During my visit, I provided another flash drive containing evidence and a statement from my wayward wife, admitting her affair as the reason for her job resignation. I believe this should be sufficient to get him fired from his position. Before leaving the job site, I decided to pay the golem a visit. After exiting the front lobby where the HR office is situated, I went around the corner to the docks area where the 18-wheelers are unloaded. It wasn't a very secure location, and one of the side doors was unlocked, allowing me to slip inside the building. Although I wasn't familiar with the layout, I knew the golem's name, so I asked an employee who directed me to his office. While walking through the warehouse, I noticed that the majority of the workers there were females, including the forklift drivers. It seemed like this company had a policy of hiring predominantly female employees. Although there were some male workers, they were few and far between. As I approached the direction of the golem's office, I saw him exiting one of the offices. I was about 50 feet away when I called him by his name. He turned toward me, trying to identify who I was. He may have assumed I was a truck driver there to drop off something. As I got closer and almost face to face with him, I didn't utter a word. Instead, I delivered a right hook, knocking him out cold with a single punch. Afterward, I calmly walked out of the warehouse. As I reached the exit door, I glanced back and saw a small crowd forming around him as he was starting to regain consciousness. I then opened the door and exited the building. Yesterday, shortly after returning from work, I heard a knock on my door. When I opened it, I found 2 police officers standing there. They had come to question me regarding the assault that occurred at my wife's former workplace. They suspected that I might be involved in the assault on Golem, but they lacked concrete evidence. From the way they framed their questions, it was clear that I was a suspect. Although I was captured on a security camera, the description wasn't very clear, possibly because I was wearing a hat. In a nutshell, Golem had identified me as a suspect and wanted to press charges. I informed the police that I was not responsible, and they asked if I had an alibi. I confirmed that I was at home with my wife, and they requested to speak with her. I agreed, called her, and she lied to cover for me. She didn't know about the assault beforehand, but quickly caught on and supported my false alibi. I'm not certain if the police were satisfied with our answers, but they took pictures of our cars, noted down my contact information, and mentioned they'd reach out if they had further questions. I messed up big time, and it's hard to believe that Golem, who had an affair with my wife, had the audacity to call the cops on me for assaulting him. Fortunately, news spread quickly, and one of the women he had been involved with had the courage to file sexual aggression charges against him. This newfound bravery might have been influenced by the fact that he was being investigated by HR and that I had confronted him at his workplace. As part of their investigation, HR questioned most of the women, and they disclosed the truth. It turns out he had been pressuring many of his female employees for sexual favors. Most of them had initially refused, and those who did comply claimed they did so out of fear or intimidation. It's a complex situation, similar to the Harvey Weinstein case, where some women were willing to engage with him to advance their careers. But once he faced legal trouble, they all portrayed themselves as victims. Nevertheless, I was pleased with the outcome. I heard that he was terminated from his job the following day. My wayward wife had kept in touch with some colleagues, so I'm not entirely sure if the story is accurate or not. A few days later, I reached out to his wife to check on her, and she informed me that they are currently separated. She explained that he no longer resides with them. She was the one who revealed to me that multiple women have filed sexual aggression cases against him. According to his wife, after confronting him with the evidence I provided, he confessed and admitted to having had sexual relations only with my wayward wife. However, it's difficult to believe his claim, especially considering that several women are pressing charges against him. This doesn't bring me any comfort. In fact, I would feel somewhat relieved if it turned out there were multiple women involved rather than just my wife. It's puzzling to me what she gained from this situation. I'm left questioning myself and my judgment for choosing her as my wife in the first place. If she was willing to engage in such behavior so easily, it raises concerns about her faithfulness during my military deployments. Writing this now, I feel utterly devastated and depressed. I've been reading numerous posts about surviving infidelity to find solace and assurance that I'm not alone in this. I also spoke with my brother on the phone, and he suggested seeking help from a therapist due to my current mental state. The VA covers various medical expenses, including visits to therapists, which wouldn't be a financial burden. Nevertheless, I'm hesitant and apprehensive about confiding in a stranger about my problems, even if they are a trained professional. Yet, here I am, sharing my story with a group of strangers online. It somehow feels therapeutic to share and receive advice from anonymous individuals, gaining different perspectives and reading comments and responses. I'm still living in the same house as my wayward wife, but we now occupy separate bedrooms. Her sister has been visiting more frequently, and things appear to be returning to a semblance of normalcy. My wayward wife has been making every effort to keep me happy. Despite this, we haven't been intimate since D-Day, and I have no desire to engage in intimacy with her. I've been procrastinating when it comes to pursuing a divorce, recognizing that the more time I waste, the more comfortable I become with her playing the role of wife and mother once again. Initially, I thought my wayward wife might be inviting her sister over to improve our relationship, since she knows I get along with her. However, it turns out my sister-in-law is considering moving closer to us on her own accord. With her kids nearly grown and her youngest about to enter college, she's looking to live closer to us. We have plenty of family nearby, including my parents, who are aware that our marriage is going through difficulties and that my wife had an affair, though they are unaware of the specifics. Despite her infidelity, my parents still hope we can work things out for the sake of the kids. A few weeks later, my sister-in-law secured a new job close to our area and moved here. My wife and I continue to reside under the same roof, but sleep in separate bedrooms. Essentially, we're roommates now, and I've consistently declined my wife's propositions for intimacy. While it's challenging to go without sex for an extended period, my military experience taught me self-control. My sister-in-law has been visiting more frequently, and it seems she's more interested in spending time with me than with her sister or the kids. My wayward wife noticed this and addressed it with her. I learned about it later, as my sister-in-law started visiting less often without explaining why. My wayward wife tends to be jealous, so her reaction didn't surprise me. It may have been for the best, because I was beginning to develop feelings for my sister-in-law, despite having harbored a long-standing attraction to her. I never acted on those feelings due to my marriage to her younger sister. I was contemplating whether to reconcile with or divorce my unfaithful wife. However, I'm increasingly inclined towards the idea of divorce. Reconciliation seems challenging because I can't bring myself to trust her again. Trust is a fundamental element in any successful relationship, and I can't share a bed with someone I can't trust. She had a 2-month affair and denied me intimacy during that time, which in my view is an unforgivable offense. My wife believes there's a chance for reconciliation, and I've noticed she's been putting in considerable effort to seduce me. She's taken to wearing seductive lace nightgowns around the house, often without underwear or a bra. I'm aware that she's trying to love bomb me and seduce me, and unfortunately, she knows my weaknesses well. It worked, as we ended up having closeness in the kitchen that night. Here's how it unfolded. I was getting something from the refrigerator, perhaps a beer, and as I walked by, I noticed her with her back to me, resting on the kitchen counter while preparing fruits for our kids' school lunch. She was wearing a transparent lace robe with no panties or bra. I tried hard to resist, but I couldn't because she had been parading around the house in that attire earlier, and she had already gotten me aroused. So, as she leaned on the counter, her back to me, I approached her from behind. I put my hands on her hips, pulled her towards me, and then gently moved her into a standing doggy position. I lifted her lace robe, and that's when things escalated. It was probably the most passionate encounter we've ever had. It wasn't the slow, romantic lovemaking we were accustomed to. It was raw and passionate, purely driven by my pent-up desires. I noticed she reached climax more quickly, and her body responded more intensely than ever before. I'm not sure if it was my imagination, but her reaction was unlike anything I'd seen in our 10 years together. During that time, we'd always had slow, tender sex, nothing aggressive or rough. We only stopped because she was getting too loud, and our kids were starting to hear her and were coming out of their rooms. I was still in a daze when the kids interrupted us, and I should have suggested we continue in the bedroom, but instead, I went to the bathroom to finish alone. Unfortunately, last night I had a quick sexual encounter with my unfaithful wife, and it revealed something new about her that I wasn't aware of. I discovered that she enjoys a bit of rough and aggressive intimacy. This revelation was surprising to me because I thought I knew everything about her. Before meeting her, I had limited experience with women, and I remained faithful to her throughout our marriage. It felt like I had married a stranger. In our usual marital intimacy, I let her take the lead, paying close attention to her desires. I've read books on how to please a woman, and most of them emphasize listening to her body's cues. Even the late Bernie Mac had a comedy skit about that. I felt like I had been engaging in conventional sex throughout our marriage, which might not have been what she truly desired. Last night, I took control and did what I wanted, disregarding her preferences, and surprisingly, she responded positively and reached climax faster. What troubled me the most was wondering what else I didn't know about my wife. I began to question myself, wondering if it was my fault that she cheated. Perhaps if I had been more assertive and rough in bed, she wouldn't have strayed with the first guy who took charge. Maybe that's what she craved, her fetish, and I failed to recognize it until now. I felt like all the marriage advice I had read was either inaccurate or didn't apply to her. Last night, it seemed like her body responded to my dominant approach, and my self-focus, disconnected from her desires, led to her heightened response. Maybe she enjoys being controlled, wanted someone to give her commands. I had always been taught to be polite and gentle with my wife, likely reading the same books on intimacy that my priest did. I'm starting to think that her infidelity may have been due to my ignorance about certain aspects of her desires. I really wanted some guidance on this, but I have no one to turn to for such questions. Outwardly, I may appear as the strong, aggressive military guy, trained for combat, but when it came to my unfaithful wife, I turned into Mr. Soft and gentle, letting her take control of our household and even our finances. It's becoming clear to me that I relinquished my power in this marriage, both inside and outside the bedroom. Recognizing my shortcomings is crucial because if I don't, I risk repeating these mistakes in future relationships. Even though the impromptu, intimate encounter with my unfaithful wife was a mistake, it shed light on our relationship. I now believe that because I failed to assert myself both in public and private, my wayward wife took the opportunity to explore being controlled. I couldn't help but think that this might not have been her first experience of this kind. Some individuals on this platform suggested that I should undergo STD testing and consider paternity tests for my children, which is a sensible idea. My kids strongly resemble me, so I find it hard to believe they aren't mine. I used to be confident that my wife didn't cheat on me while I was in the military, but not anymore. These past few weeks have taught me that I don't know as much as I thought I did. I mean, if I hadn't received that letter about her infidelity, she might still be involved with Gollum to this day. I often wonder if his assertiveness played a role in her continued attraction to him. Yesterday, I took an STD test, received the results the same day, and fortunately, I tested negative. Additionally, I decided to go through with the paternity test, as many of you suggested. I collected saliva swabs from 3 of my children for this purpose, all without my wayward wife's knowledge. I'll receive the paternity test results in about 4 weeks. I'm not overly concerned about the paternity test results because I believe my kids are mine, and the timing of their conception aligns with when I was at home. During my time in the military, we lived in on-base housing provided for married service members. As for an update, there's not much to report at the moment. I'm still contemplating moving forward with the divorce. My lawyer has drafted the separation agreement, and it turns out that I will be required to pay her alimony. This won't be much different from our current arrangement, as I've been providing her with financial support since she was a stay-at-home mom. Currently, we're on speaking terms, but sleeping in separate bedrooms, essentially living as roommates. We haven't engaged in any intimate activities since our unexpected encounter on the kitchen counter. She's been making efforts to win me back, but I've been avoiding her, staying out late, hanging out with friends after work, and sometimes not even returning home. She calls my cell phone to check on my whereabouts, but I choose not to answer. She's noticed that I'm emotionally distant and feel that I've mentally checked out of the marriage. I should have initiated the divorce process weeks ago, but I'm hesitant due to my aversion to change. I'm also concerned about managing my demanding job while sharing custody of the children. When we do separate, I'll likely aim for a 70-30 custody arrangement in favor of spending more time with the kids. I adore my children and cherish every moment with them. They often prefer to spend more time with me than with my wayward wife because I tend to indulge them, buying them presents and being lenient, while she takes on the role of disciplinarian. I occasionally hide the gifts I purchase for my kids to avoid my wayward wife's scrutiny, although she usually discovers them eventually. I am the primary breadwinner, and she has been the homemaker, and this arrangement has worked for me. The police haven't contacted me yet regarding the assault, and I hope it remains that way. I've heard that a civil case has been filed against Gollum, but I'm not sure if he's in jail or what happened to him. Apparently, before I intervened, none of these women thought it was a good idea to report him to the HR department for sexual aggression or a similar offense, maybe because they felt their voices wouldn't be heard. I suppose my actions of confronting and humiliating Gollum gave them the courage to stand up against him. Yesterday, I received the paternity test results, and they confirmed that all 3 kids are indeed mine. Thank goodness for that. It looks like I'll be proceeding with the divorce. As I mentioned earlier in this post, I have no qualms about financially supporting my wayward wife. I had informed her beforehand that I would be serving her with divorce papers, and she cried, but she understands there's no turning back. Despite all the embarrassment and pain she caused me, I genuinely wish her well. I have no doubt that she will find someone else soon because she's still a very attractive woman. However, it's the end of the road for both of us. In our conversation before serving her, we discussed her future, and she mentioned getting a part-time teaching job to keep herself occupied. We agreed that I would continue to provide her with an allowance of $3,000 per month, including child support, so the money will be for her and my kids. I've heard that it might not be a wise idea to avoid the legal system, but I have reservations about having more government involvement in my paycheck. Finally, we completed the divorce agreement with both our lawyers present. It was an amicable divorce, and I hold no grudge against her. She clearly regrets her actions and took responsibility for them. I've forgiven her for the sake of my kids, but I'll never trust her or consider reconciling. I recently found a nice 2-bedroom apartment in a good area of town. There are plenty of beautiful women around, and I never had the chance to date since my wife was the only woman I'd been with. It's not as easy as it seems to muster the courage to ask a girl out, because I've never really learned how to date, but I'm still an attractive guy, and women do check me out from time to time, so I like my chances. One more thing, my sister-in-law has been visiting my apartment more often now that I'm no longer living with my wayward wife. It's clear that she's attracted to me, and we've been spending more time together. I don't know where this is headed, but I'm not interested in dating her, and I think she understands that. Nonetheless, we both enjoy each other's company.
Molly Jacobs had always been a free spirit, and her childhood was full of exploration, fun, and the carefree nature typical of kids her age. She spent countless hours outdoors, climbing trees, running through fields, or splashing in creeks. She felt a deep connection to nature, which only grew stronger as she got older. Her father, Jimmy, was her constant companion on these adventures, teaching her how to fish, hike, and enjoy the simple things in life. They shared many quiet moments, lost in the beauty of their surroundings. But as she entered her teenage years, things began to change. The once close relationship between her and her mother, Linda, which had already been strained, started to unravel even more. As Molly grew up, she became more aware of her mother's strict expectations, which clashed with her free-spirited personality. The tension between them became obvious, especially as Molly began to push boundaries and question the rules Linda had always enforced. Their growing differences set the stage for the conflict that would soon take over their home. Molly Jacobs seemed like any other 15-year-old, constantly at odds with her mother, Linda. Their relationship was full of arguments, as Linda constantly criticized Molly's behavior, her friends, or her fashion choices. Linda's focus on appearances and the family's image in Northfield, Minnesota, was a frequent source of tension. Having struggled in high school herself, Linda was determined to make sure Molly didn't face the same issues, pushing her to fit in with the more popular crowd. However, Linda's attempts to control Molly's life without asking about her feelings or goals only drove them further apart. Molly loved sports and the outdoors. Linda wanted her in orchestra and debate. Molly liked being rebellious, had pierced her left ear as many times as possible, and was thinking about getting a nose ring. Linda refused to allow it and wouldn't sign the permission slip. Molly wanted to dye her hair blue and shave one side, but Linda threatened to ground her for weeks if she did. Molly's dad, Jimmy, was laid back and had learned not to sweat the small stuff. Growing up, he had watched his best friend Van struggle with his own father, a strict, born-again Christian. Van wasn't allowed to wear his hair in the popular long style, and his dad always gave him crew cuts that made him a target for teasing at school. This led to many fights, with Jimmy always backing Van up. Seeing how small issues like haircuts could cause so much trouble made Jimmy realize they weren't worth fighting over. In fact, Jimmy encouraged Molly to express her individuality as long as she wasn't hurting herself or others. No pills, no Zex, no bullying, no lying, no cheating. Those were his rules. If she wanted blue hair, he'd say, "Go for it." If she wanted to pierce her nose, he'd sign the form. Jimmy was easygoing, but he had two firm rules: no lying and always show loyalty. He'd tell Molly, "You have to communicate your feelings. Don't keep secrets." Molly, no, he'd say, "Secrets can eat away at you." They eventually come out, and the longer they're hidden, the more damage they cause. His other rule, loyalty, meant being true to family, friends, and yourself. Be loyal to your morals and your friends. Help them make the right choices and stand by them. Because of these qualities, Jimmy had many friends and a solid reputation as a copyright lawyer. Although his job as a partner in a high-tech law firm kept him busy, he always made time to attend Molly's soccer and softball games and her school events. He also made time for hiking, biking, fishing, kayaking, and camping with her, knowing she was growing up fast and soon wouldn't be around to do those things with him. His wife Linda sometimes joined them, but usually opted out. As a result, Molly and Jimmy formed an incredibly close bond. Linda was somewhat jealous of this, but didn't see the value in the activities they shared. Every Wednesday, Linda had the day off and would tell Jimmy and Molly she'd use the time to cook and freeze meals, catch up on housework, shop, or visit her parents. Many times when Molly came home, she'd see Jimmy's older brother Dan driving away in his pickup. When Molly asked Linda if Uncle Dan had been over, Linda sometimes said no, which seemed odd. Why else would his truck be here, Molly wondered. Other times, Linda said Dan had come by to discuss a landscaping project, borrow tools, or talk to Jimmy. It all seemed a bit strange, but then again, her extended family was odd in general. Linda was usually home before Molly, who arrived around 5:30 after sports practice, and always before Jimmy, who could get home as early as 6 or as late as 9. On this particular day, just after lunch at about 12:30, Molly started having bad menstrual cramps. She asked to see the nurse and convinced her to let her leave early. Molly called her mother, but the call went straight to voicemail. She tried again with the same result and left a quick message. "Mom, I'm not feeling well, so I'm leaving school. It's just 10 blocks, so I'll walk. But if you get this, can you pick me up? I'll take Maple Street home. Thanks." Molly walked home and never got a call back. She's probably working out, shopping, or busy, she thought. Figures. She gets mad if I don't answer her calls. But when I call her, nothing. As she rounded the corner of her block, she saw Uncle Dan's truck in the driveway. He must need more tools, she thought. Molly walked up to the house, but the door was locked, which was odd. Instead of ringing the bell, she took out her keys and unlocked the door. The house was dark and quiet. She dropped her backpack and checked the garage for Dan, but it was empty too. As she came back inside, she heard moaning and panting upstairs. Curious, she quietly walked up and down the hallway to her parents' bedroom. She peeked around the door and was shocked to see her mom, Linda, on her knees next to Uncle Dan. Both were moaning. Molly backed away, stunned and crying. She didn't know what to do, but the more she thought about the betrayal, the angrier she became. This time she peeked again with her phone recording. She walked into the room and yelled, "How could you do this to our family? And you, Uncle Dan? You slept with your brother's wife. I hate you both." Dan and Linda, confused at first, recoiled in horror when they saw Molly filming and yelling at them. Molly ran downstairs as Linda screamed, "Oh my God! No! Molly, no! Please come back. It's not what you think. Please, let's talk." She chased after her, but Molly was already out the front door by the time Linda reached the landing. Linda turned to Dan, shouting, "Get dressed and start your truck. We need to catch her. We have to stop her from telling Jimmy. It'll destroy him and he'll eliminate us both. Hurry!" She burst into tears, and Dan yelled, "You can cry later. Get dressed and let's go." Molly ran to the end of the block, crossed the street, and cut through the backyards of 3 more blocks. She didn't know what to do. Her phone rang, and she saw it was Linda. She ignored it, and when it rang again a minute later, she still didn't answer. She decided to run the mile to the 9 Mile Creek Nature Trails, a place she and her dad loved to hike. Their favorite spot was in a little grassy area, surrounded by 5 massive cottonwood trees. They called it our trees, and would sometimes race each other there. Molly sat down behind the trees, put her head on her knees, and cried. How could my mom do this to Dad and me? How could Uncle Dan betray Jimmy like this? She sobbed as tears streamed down her face. She kept ignoring her mom's calls, not wanting to talk, now or maybe ever again. In moments like this, she always reached out to her dad. Meanwhile, Linda had tried calling Molly multiple times with no answer. She finally listened to Molly's voicemail about feeling sick, leaving school, and needing a ride. Linda had been kissing Dan on the couch when the calls came in, assuming it was just Jimmy checking in, so she ignored them. The last thing she wanted was her husband interrupting her. She already felt guilty, but the thrill of the affair kept pulling her in, and she couldn't seem to stop. Linda had been sleeping with Dan behind Jimmy's back for about 10 weeks now. She knew it needed to stop, knew it was affecting her family, and understood it would be a disaster if anyone found out. But she hadn't yet found the strength to end things with Dan and give up her secret. The guilt and thrill of danger kept her hooked. She justified it by thinking no one really needed her anymore, and this was something just for her, believing it wouldn't hurt Jimmy. She didn't realize it was already putting an emotional wall between her and her family, likely from the guilt. If only she had thought about the consequences. How could I be so stupid to risk everything that actually matters to me? Now she despised herself for what she had done. Or maybe she just hated getting caught. She didn't have time to figure that out, but she dreaded having to dig deep to understand why she had taken such risks. Now that Molly had caught her and run off, it hit her how many people would be hurt by her actions, including herself. She never understood how she had let it happen. She loved Jimmy and Molly more than anything, and she realized her affair was eroding her marriage. But she couldn't seem to resist the excitement and lust that came with her secret indulgence. Now, she couldn't bear to think about the likely fallout, and how she might have just destroyed the people she loved and, in turn, herself. She frantically called Molly's phone, leaving messages, begging her not to tell Jimmy, as it would destroy him. Molly kept ignoring her mother's calls and decided to call her dad. She dialed him, and he answered on the second ring. "Hey, little rebel woman, what's up? Aren't you in school? Are you okay?" Jimmy immediately heard his daughter sobbing on the other end. "Molly, what's wrong? What happened? Are you hurt? Where are you? Where's your mom?" "Dad, please come quickly. I need you. I'm at the trees." Don't tell Mom, and don't take any calls from her before you get here. Please. Molly, why? Did you and your mom have a big fight? Are you all right? What's going on? Just come, Daddy. No calls to or from Mom. Please, just hurry. I'm okay. But I need you now. Okay? You stay safe and don't move. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Jimmy rushed out of his office, not bothering to explain much to his executive assistant. I'm out for the day. A client's having a meltdown. I'll fill you in tomorrow. He sprinted to his Porsche SUV. His phone started ringing again, and he saw it was Linda. He ignored it, remembering his promise to Molly. The call stopped, only to ring again immediately. He let it go to voicemail, started the Porsche, and sped out of the parking lot. In his rush across town to the nature center, Jimmy pulled into the parking lot, jumped out, and still in his suit and dress shoes, ran down the path toward their spot. He found Molly curled up in a ball, crying. Molly, what's wrong? He asked, crouching beside her. She threw herself into his arms, sobbing even louder, her body trembling. Jimmy stroked her hair and back, trying to calm her. After a few minutes, she started to settle down. Molly, did someone hurt you? What happened? Did you fight with Mom? Just as he spoke, Molly's phone rang again. He picked it up and saw it was another call from Linda. He also noticed the string of missed calls. As soon as her phone stopped, his started ringing. It was Linda. He was about to answer, but Molly begged, No, Dad, don't pick up. We need to talk. Molly, I don't get it. What's happening? Why don't you want me to talk to Mom? Dad, I don't know what to do. You always told me to tell the truth, be loyal to family, and not keep secrets because they eat you up from the inside. But what if the truth is worse? What if it destroys people? Then what? Molly, I can see you're hurting, but it's always better to bring the hard truths into the open. That way your family and friends can help you deal with it. Dad, I'm so sorry. She hesitated, wiping her tears. Has Mom been calling you? Did she leave a voicemail? Please listen to it. Jimmy looked at her strangely, but pulled up the voicemail. Jimmy, I need to talk to you. Molly and I had a fight, and she ran off. She's upset, and I don't think she fully understands what she saw. I'm trying to find her. Can you help me? Please tell her to call me, and know that I love only you and Molly, always. Molly let out a bitter growl when she heard the message and then said, Now, let me play you mine. Molly played the first voicemail from Linda, who was sobbing. Molly, it's not what you think. It meant nothing. Just a harmless, meaningless act. Please call me and talk to me before you do anything rash. Please talk to me before you talk to your dad. Molly shook her head in disbelief and muttered, Yeah, right. A harmless act. Jimmy, now more confused, asked, Molly, what's going on? Molly took a deep breath. Dad, please bear with me. Let's listen to the next voicemail from Mom. She pressed play again, and Linda's voice was desperate. Molly, please talk to me. Don't tell anyone, especially your dad. It will destroy him and our family. Molly jumped up, her anger flaring. Screw you, Mom. You're blaming me? You're saying I'm the one destroying the family? That takes some nerve. Jimmy was now seriously concerned. Molly, you have to tell me what's going on. Out with it. Molly took a breath and said, Dad, are you sure you heard her? She's saying it'll destroy the family, but I think she already did that anyway. She hesitated before continuing. You need to know the truth. I'm so sorry, Dad. She began, I didn't feel well at school, so I decided to come home early. I called Mom a few times for a ride, but her phone was off. I walked home, and when I got there, Uncle Dan's truck was in the driveway. The front door was locked, so I used my key. No one was downstairs, but I heard noises from your bedroom, so I went upstairs. Her voice broke. I'm so sorry, Dad. For you, for me, for everything. You need to see this. She handed her phone to Jimmy and put her head down on her knees, crying softly. Jimmy played the video, watching in horror as the scene unfolded, Linda and Dan together in his bedroom. The video ended with Molly's anguished cry and the shock and shame on Linda and Dan's faces as they realized they'd been caught. The emotions on their faces, pleasure turning into horror, fear, and guilt, were unbearable to witness. Jimmy turned off the phone, his head sinking to his knees. Tears began to fall. Why, God? Why? How could she do this to us? With my own brother? How could they betray me like this? Molly slid closer to him, putting her arm around his shoulder. I'm so sorry, Dad. I feel the same betrayal and pain. I never want to see either of them again. I hate them for what they've done to us, to you, and for tearing our family apart. Meanwhile, Linda had failed to reach either Molly or Jimmy. She called Jimmy's office, and his assistant told her he had left quickly to see a client. The assistant offered to call him, but Linda declined, panicking more by the minute. Dan and Linda had driven around the neighborhood searching for Molly, but eventually Dan dropped Linda off at the house. He looked at her and said, "Let's hope Molly doesn't say anything to Jimmy. You know he'll never forgive us." "I have to get to her before Jimmy finds out. I have to convince her this meant nothing," Linda said, her voice trembling with fear. She called Molly again, but it went straight to voicemail. She cried into the phone, "Molly, I'm so sorry. Please believe me, it meant nothing. It's over. Please call me before you talk to anyone, especially your dad. It'll destroy everything." Linda got out of the truck and walked into the house, frantic and desperate. She called out for Molly, knowing there'd be no answer. She rushed upstairs, stripped the bed, and replaced the sheets, as she had done every Wednesday for the last 10 weeks. She sat on the edge of the bed, trembling with sobs, questioning how she had let things get this far. Why did I do this? Why risk my marriage and family for something so meaningless? She thought. She didn't even like Dan that much. She certainly didn't love him. Her love for Jimmy had never faded, but her behavior showed how she had emotionally distanced herself. She realized how she had started to nag Molly and stopped being open and loving with Jimmy. When was the last time she had shown him any real affection? What the hell is wrong with me? She thought, trying to piece together when it all went wrong. Then it hit her. It wasn't about Dan. It was about the thrill, the excitement of doing something secret. My life felt boring, and it seemed like no one needed me anymore. Not Jimmy, not even Molly. With her attitude, Molly had pulled away, breaking the bond they once had. Jimmy didn't need extra excitement. He had plenty of it in his fast-paced law career, and he spent what free time he had with Molly. Linda knew their sex life was lacking, but whenever Jimmy tried to discuss it or suggest counseling, she always shut him down, insisting everything was fine. Eventually, he stopped asking, emotionally distancing himself from her. Now Linda realized it was all her fault. Dan, on the other hand, constantly complimented her, telling her how attractive she was. He made her feel needed again, something she didn't get from her husband. Dan wasn't getting the same connection from his wife, Amanda, especially with her being 6 months pregnant with their second child. Their flirting, along with Dan's compliments about her beauty and desirability, had escalated into kissing and touching. It was only a matter of time before it turned into full-blown, lustful sex. Now, Linda couldn't forget the look of hurt, pain, and disgust on Molly's face when she caught them. Molly had called her cheap, and Linda couldn't disagree. She thought about Amanda, about Dan and Jimmy's relationship, about their families. Why am I just now realizing how horrible this is? I've ruined my life without thinking of the consequences. She collapsed onto the bed, curling into a fetal position and sobbing until she cried herself to sleep. Meanwhile, Jimmy and Molly remained by the trees, taking turns crying and talking. "What are we going to do, Dad?" Molly asked, wiping her eyes. Jimmy shook his head. "I don't know, Molly. I feel so much anger and pain. I've been betrayed by the woman I loved and my own brother, who I thought would always have my back. And now you're in the middle of this mess, knowing that our family will never be the same." He sighed deeply. "I don't know if I can even look at Linda, much less forgive her. But she's your mom, and you'll always need some kind of relationship with her. That might seem impossible now, but we'll figure it out. For now, let's get a hotel room. Calm down, rest, and deal with everything tomorrow." They drove downtown and booked a suite at the Hilton. Jimmy planned to work from the hotel the next day, call the school to report Molly as sick, and buy some time. They could stay there for a few days while figuring out their next steps. The next day, when Linda went to work, assuming she did, Jimmy would go to the house and pack their clothes for a few days. Jimmy also called his friend Jack Wilson, the district attorney, and briefly explained the situation. He told Jack that Linda might file a missing person report, but assured him that Molly was safe with him and they'd eventually contact her. Jack reluctantly agreed to delay any action, but warned Jimmy he could only hold off until Monday. That evening, Molly and Jimmy checked into the Hilton, ordered burgers and fries from room service, and spent the night lying on their respective beds watching TV in a daze until they fell asleep. At 10 p.m., Linda woke up groggy and panicked, realizing neither Jimmy nor Molly had returned her calls. "Oh, God, no," she thought. Jimmy must know, or he would have called by now. She called their phones again, but both went straight to voicemail. She texted Jimmy saying, "Jimmy, I guess you know. Please understand it meant nothing, and I only love you. I'm so sorry, but you need to tell me Molly is safe, and we need to talk. Please let me explain." She didn't know what she would say to Jimmy. Would he want details? Should she minimize it and say it was just one mistake? She spent the next few hours thinking about how to explain herself, but received no response. Crawling under the covers, she tried to sleep, but it was a sleepless, tear-filled night filled with regret and self-hatred for what she had done. The next morning, Jimmy and Molly woke early and went down to the Hilton's breakfast buffet. Jimmy called the school to let them know Molly would be out for a few days, then contacted work to say he'd be working remotely, but was available by phone or email if needed. Looking across the table at Molly, he said, "I'm so sorry you had to see all of this. You didn't deserve to get pulled into this mess. You should have had more time to just be a kid, but now, here you are 15, and you've seen the worst side of adulthood." He continued, "I've always told you how important loyalty, honesty, and sticking to your morals is. Now you've seen how ugly things get when someone throws that away. What your mom did with Dan can't be undone. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but since you're in the middle of this, we'll figure it out together." Jimmy sighed. "I think I need to call Dan and find out what the hell is going on." He dialed Dan's number, and when Dan answered, he said, "Hold on, Jimmy, let me step outside so I don't wake Amanda." Rushing to the porch, Dan asked, "What's going on, Jimmy?" Jimmy's rage erupted. "What's going on? You tell me what's going on. No lies. Just tell me when, why, and how long you've been screwing my wife." There was a long pause before Dan finally said, "Jimmy, I'm so sorry, man. It just happened, and once we started, we couldn't stop. But it wasn't about you, Jimmy. It's not like we're in love. It was purely physical, just sex. I'm sorry, Jimmy, but it didn't mean anything to either of us. Have you talked to Linda? You should be asking her these questions." "I'm asking you. How long?" Dan sighed, defeated. "The last 10 weeks, Jimmy. Every Wednesday at your house." Jimmy's voice cracked with fury. "Why? Why would you betray me like this?" "Jimmy, it wasn't about you. Amanda's pregnant, and I wasn't getting much attention at home. I was so drawn to Linda. It started with flirting, then kissing, and eventually, we ended up in bed. I'm sorry. You need to forgive us. We'll get past this." "Forgive you?" Jimmy's voice turned cold. "Listen to me, Dan. This is how things are now between us. I will never speak to you or see you again. If I ever do, you'd better run because I will break your face. You are dead to me. I'll never feel like I have a brother again." Dan began pleading. "Jimmy, don't let this ruin our relationship. It was just sex. It didn't mean anything." "It meant everything to me, Dan. You destroyed my marriage, my trust, and my family. Don't you dare say it didn't mean anything." With that, Jimmy hung up, deciding it was the last time he'd ever talk to Dan. Molly and Jimmy spent Thursday and Friday in the hotel room, working, ordering room service, and watching TV in silence. They tried to distract themselves, but the weight of the situation lingered between them. Occasionally, they'd take short walks to get some air. Linda kept calling, but they ignored her, not checking any voicemails. Meanwhile, Linda grew more frantic. She had been trying to reach Dan too, but he wasn't answering either. By Friday afternoon, she was at her wit's end and went to the police station to file a missing persons report for Molly. She approached the desk, clearly distressed, and said, "My daughter has run away, and I need to file a missing persons report. Can you help me?" The officer took down her information, her name, her daughter's name, her husband's name, and their address, then asked her to wait. After a few minutes, Jack Wilson, the district attorney and a close friend of Jimmy's, walked out. He introduced himself. "Mrs. Jacobs, I'm Jack Wilson. Let's talk for a moment." He led Linda to a small room and asked her to sit. "Mrs. Jacobs, I want you to know that Molly is fine. She's with Jimmy and he contacted me. I agreed to give him through the weekend before we take any official action on the missing persons report. Rest assured, Molly is safe, but that's all I can tell you for now." Linda's heart sank. She could feel Jack's disapproval and knew Jimmy had likely told him everything. She realized there was no point in arguing. Jack handed her his card and showed her out, his demeanor cold and distant. Linda left the station, walked back to her car, and burst into tears. "Oh God, what have I done?" she thought, sitting there in despair. Back at the Hilton, Jimmy looked at Molly and said, "We need to at least let your mom know you're okay. Do you want to talk to her?" Molly shook her head firmly. No, Dad, I don't think I ever want to talk to her again. I can't imagine any excuse or apology that would make me believe or forgive her. How could we ever trust her again? Molly, I get how you feel. We're both hurt and angry, but time will ease that. We'll have to decide if we want to try to fix this family or move on. But I think we owe her the chance to tell her side of the story. We should go home, talk to her, and see if she's willing to be honest. At the very least, we need to grab some clothes and your school stuff. You need to be ready for Monday. After a long silence, Molly finally agreed. They decided they'd head to the house on Sunday morning. Sunday arrived, and as Jimmy and Molly pulled up to the house, they both felt a deep sense of dread. The house was quiet and dim, except for a faint light glowing from the kitchen. When they walked inside, they found Linda sitting at the kitchen island, staring into a cup of coffee. She looked like she had aged a decade in just a few days. Her face was swollen, her eyes red from crying, and her hair a tangled mess. When they entered, she looked up, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and fear. Linda immediately jumped up, rushing toward Molly to embrace her, but Molly stepped back, raising her arms defensively. She circled the kitchen, keeping as much distance from her mother as possible. Jimmy did the same, stepping back with a stern, unreadable expression. Linda, Jimmy began, his voice cold and steady, we're here to talk about what you did and why. You've caused both of us immense pain, destroyed our trust in you, and shattered our family. I don't know if we can ever recover from what Molly saw and recorded, but I'll give you a chance to explain your side of the story. Linda began crying immediately, her hands trembling as she grabbed a tissue. She wiped her eyes and blew her nose before speaking, her voice shaky. I'm so sorry. Please understand, it wasn't about either of you. I love you both more than anything. Jimmy, it was just Zex. It didn't mean anything. It was the first and only time, and I swear it'll never happen again. Don't throw away our marriage over one mistake. She avoided Jimmy's gaze as she lied, and when she looked back, she saw the fury boiling just beneath his calm exterior. Jimmy turned to Molly and said quietly, I guess we're going with Plan B. Without saying anything, Molly left the kitchen and went upstairs to pack her clothes and grab her backpack. As soon as Molly was out of the room, Jimmy turned to Linda, his voice rising with anger. So, you're using all the standard excuses, huh? It didn't mean anything. It was one mistake. Well, Linda, you're full of crap. I talked to Dan. I know this has been going on for 10 weeks, every Wednesday, in my house. I also saw that video, and you were all in with him. So, who's lying? Him or you? Because I know it's you. Linda started to speak, but Jimmy cut her off. I told Dan he's dead to me. I'll never speak to him again. With you it's harder, but right now I feel the same way. Don't talk to me about one mistake. This was an ongoing affair, and you wouldn't have stopped if Molly hadn't walked in on you. You're more upset about being caught than about what you did. Jimmy's voice broke with emotion. You threw away our marriage the moment you started flirting with Dan and turned it into a relationship. How do you expect your 15-year-old daughter to ever deal with what she saw? I could choke you as easily as I could look at you right now. With that, Jimmy stormed upstairs to the master bedroom, leaving Linda sobbing on the kitchen floor. She curled into a ball, realizing she had made things worse by lying. She thought minimizing the affair would help, but it only enraged Jimmy more. Now, she wondered if there was any chance to save her marriage or her relationship with Molly. Minutes later, Jimmy and Molly came back downstairs with their suitcases. Jimmy removed his wedding ring, set it on the counter, and without a word, they walked out. Linda remained on the kitchen floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Back at the Hilton, Jimmy wasted no time. That afternoon, he began searching for apartments near Molly's school and his office. By the end of the day, he had secured a 6-month lease for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath unit with a pool, spa, BBQ grills, and a workout room. The next morning, Jimmy dropped Molly off at school and returned to the hotel to pack their belongings and check out. He moved their things to the new apartment, setting everything up for when Molly returned from school. Since it was only 6 blocks from the school, she could attend her after-school sports practice and walk home afterward. Jimmy then headed to work and called his financial planners. He began separating his finances from Linda's, moving joint savings and investments into individual accounts. He made sure a significant portion of the savings went into a trust for Molly's college fund, ensuring it couldn't be touched during the divorce. He also changed his insurance beneficiary to Molly and arranged for his parents to gain legal guardianship over her in case anything happened to him before she turned 18. 10 days later, Jimmy's financial adjustments and divorce strategy were ready. He instructed his lawyer to prepare the papers, but not serve them until he gave the go-ahead. During the last 10 days, Linda had been relentlessly calling and texting both Molly and Jimmy, pleading to talk, asking to go to family counseling, and begging them to come home. Jimmy had instructed security at his office not to let her on the property. Molly had gone to the vice principal at school and explained the situation, convincing him that Linda shouldn't be allowed on school grounds either. Around that time, Molly received a voicemail from Linda's parents that left her confused. The message implied they didn't understand why Molly and Jimmy were treating their daughter so badly over what they called a minor disagreement. They couldn't comprehend why they had moved out and stopped talking to Linda. Molly, baffled by this, decided to call Jimmy's parents to see if they knew what was going on. When she got on the phone with them, she said, "Hi, Grandma. How are things? Have you been in touch with the family? What's new? I know we haven't seen you for a while." Jimmy's parents responded that not much had changed. They were excited about Dan and Amanda's upcoming baby, and mentioned that Dan and Amanda were coming over for brunch that weekend. They even asked if Linda, Jimmy, and Molly would like to join them. Molly quickly realized that no one in the family knew the truth of what had happened. Linda hadn't told her parents anything, and it seemed Dan hadn't told Amanda or his parents the real story, unless they were being unusually forgiving. Later that evening at the apartment, Jimmy got a call from Linda's sister, Sherry. She was upset, scolding him for taking Molly and leaving Linda over what she believed was just a minor disagreement about school activities and friends. "How could you be so cruel, Jimmy? This doesn't sound like you at all." Jimmy simply replied, "There are personal issues between Linda and me, and they'll take time to work out." 20 minutes later, Linda's parents called with a similar message. "Why would you leave over a few minor arguments and disagreements?" By the end of the evening, Jimmy's own parents called and asked if he, Linda, and Dan could come over for brunch. Jimmy inquired if Dan had mentioned anything to them, and they said Dan had told them Jimmy was angry because Dan hadn't returned some tools, which led to a fight and the two weren't talking. Jimmy's mom added, "Come on, Dan, grow up. You can't fight with family over something as small as tools. Come over this weekend and make up. Besides, we haven't seen Linda or Molly in ages." Jimmy made up an excuse that Molly had an out-of-town soccer game, so they wouldn't be able to attend. Molly noticed Jimmy was trying to take the high road, but neither Linda nor Dan had been honest with anyone about what had really happened. Frustrated, she said to her dad, "It's clear that neither Mom nor Dan has told anyone the real story, and now you're getting the blame." She was angry, but Jimmy just shrugged and said, "Things will work themselves out." 2 weeks later, after deep reflection and discussions with Molly, Jimmy came to a decision. The love he once had for Linda, combined with the betrayal, deceit, and her failure to own up to her actions, was too much to forgive. On top of that, Linda hadn't taken any responsibility with her family, and neither had Dan. Jimmy realized it was over, so he asked his lawyers to serve Linda the divorce papers. Meanwhile, Linda was at home strategizing how to get Jimmy and Molly back so she could work on rebuilding their relationships. She knew she had hurt them, but she was still rationalizing that it was just meaningless sex. And since it was over, things could return to normal. She kept telling herself that they would miss her and eventually return. And when they did, she would be the most loving wife and mother possible. As she was contemplating how to approach Jimmy, she heard a car pull up outside, and then a knock on the door. Looking through the window, she saw a young man in a suit. She opened the door, and he asked, "Are you Linda Jacobson?" Worried something might have happened to Molly or Jimmy, she replied, "Yes, I am. Is everything all right?" The man handed her a manila folder and said, "Mrs. Jacobson, you've been served." He quickly snapped a photo of her holding the packet and then turned and walked back to his car. Confused, Linda went into the living room, sat down, and opened the envelope. The first page read, "Petition for divorce." Her eyes filled with tears as she dropped the documents. For the first time, she truly understood that she had likely thrown away her marriage and family for a meaningless affair. A few days after Linda got the divorce papers, Jimmy began receiving calls from all sides of the family. Linda's parents called and demanded, "How could you take her child, move out, and divorce your wife over just a few disagreements? Don't end your marriage just because you two are arguing over raising your daughter. Get together and work it out." Then Jimmy's parents called. "Jimmy, what's going on? Linda says you're divorcing her, won't talk to her, and are keeping her daughter from her. She says you're just going through a rough patch and that she loves you and wants to save the family. This doesn't sound like you. Isn't this too extreme for just a few arguments?" Then Jimmy's sister-in-law, Amanda, called and scolded him. Jimmy, why aren't you talking to Dan over tool arguments? And why are you thinking about divorcing Linda for such small reasons? You need help, Jimmy, maybe counseling. Jimmy tried to ignore it all, sticking to one line on the phone. This is a personal issue between Linda, Molly, and me. If you want to know why there won't be any reconciliation and why divorce is the only option for me, ask Linda. But that didn't stop the calls. They even started reaching out to Molly, telling her to return to her mother, whose heart was broken. Molly could see the pain this was causing Jimmy and how he was being cast as the villain by the entire family. She knew Dan hadn't told anyone the truth and was blaming his fallout with Jimmy on the missing tools. Molly also saw that Linda was trying to rally the family to convince her and Jimmy to return, without ever taking responsibility or revealing the real story. She knew Jimmy wouldn't. He'd let his relationships be damaged by Linda's betrayal, refusing to air the truth that could destroy Linda's relationships. Molly had enough. During study hall one day, she pulled out her computer and wrote an email to the entire family. It said, "To everyone blaming my dad for the issues between my mom, us, and Dan, it pains me to send the attached video, and I know it will shock and hurt you like it did me when I walked in on this nightmare and recorded it. It's unfair for Jimmy to be punished by the family for something he didn't do. He's been betrayed by his wife, his brother, and now by all of you. I've had enough. Please watch this and ask yourselves, what would you do if you were in my dad's shoes? What would you do if the two people you trusted most betrayed you in the worst way, lied about it, and refused to take responsibility? Watch the video privately, and then you can talk to my mom and Uncle Dan about how Jimmy should respond." She copied the entire family, her dad, and knowing he'd be upset, also Linda and Dan. Then, still angry and hurt, she hit send. Linda was at work with her phone off when she finished and went to her car. At the end of the day, she turned her phone on, expecting a message from Jimmy in response to her repeated calls, begging for forgiveness and a chance to explain. Instead, she saw missed calls from her parents, Amanda and Jimmy's parents. She listened to Amanda's voicemail first. "You cheater, you ruined Jimmy's life with your affair with Dan, and you ruined mine too. I never want to talk to you again, and if I can, I'll testify for Jimmy in the divorce. He treated you with respect, and you threw it away with your dirty behavior. Maybe Dan should come stay with you because he's getting kicked out tonight." Linda wasn't sure if Dan had confessed or what had happened, but she had a sinking feeling the family knew the truth. Her mom's voicemail was next. "Linda, how could you? I was disgusted and horrified watching that video, with Jimmy's brother in your own bed. And poor Molly walked in on her mom and uncle betraying her dad, herself, and the whole family. How could you?" Her mother then broke into sobs and hung up. Linda slumped down in her driver's seat and cried. She opened her email on her iPhone and saw the message from Molly. She didn't want to watch the video, knowing exactly what it would show, but she did so to see it from the family's perspective. It wasn't just the disgusting acts, but also hearing herself and Dan clearly. Linda knew it was over. Any hope of getting her family's help to convince Jimmy to talk to her was gone. What was she thinking? More lies, more disrespect, and refusing to take responsibility were just as damaging as the affair itself. She realized she had been fooling herself. There was no way back, not with Jimmy. He was too hurt and too disrespected. She also realized she had lost any close, loving connection with her daughter forever. She no longer had the right to act as a parent, and any advice or guidance she gave would seem like a hypocritical joke. Linda cried in the parking lot for an hour before she could start her car and drive home. 3 weeks later, Jimmy's lawyer called and informed her that since she hadn't signed and returned the divorce papers, a court hearing had been scheduled for 2 weeks. He advised her to get a lawyer and prepare. On a friend's recommendation, someone who had gone through a similar situation, Linda hired a divorce attorney. She was honest with her lawyer about her affair with Dan and how she ended up in this position. After reviewing the documents, the lawyer said, "Your husband is being fairly generous with a 50-50 split of assets. He's not hiding money or leveraging the video except for one thing. He's requesting 100% custody of your daughter. That's rarely granted, so we'll go to court, reject that part, and leave it to the judge." When they appeared in court, it was the first time Linda had seen Jimmy or Molly in 8 weeks. They looked rested, and Molly seemed older and more mature than Linda remembered. Neither would make eye contact, and when Linda tried to speak to them in the hallway, they just walked away. Linda tried to plead, saying, "I'm so sorry. Please don't hate me forever. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I can't bear the thought of you hating me forever. If you could find it in your heart to have any relationship with me, I would be so grateful." With that, they entered the courtroom and the proceedings began. When they got to the custody issue, the judge was prepared to grant the standard 50-50 arrangement. Jimmy's lawyer then asked the judge, "Your Honor, before you decide, my client's daughter has requested to speak with you privately." The judge replied, "This is unusual, but given her age, I'll allow it." Molly approached the bench with both lawyers present and said, "Please, Your Honor, I don't want to live with my mother. She's damaged our relationship beyond repair. If you give her custody, I'll run away. I won't spend a single night at her house. Please watch this short video and understand what I walked in on one day after school. The man in the video is my uncle, my dad's brother. This had been going on for months and wouldn't have stopped if they hadn't been caught." She started the video and handed the judge her phone. His expression changed as he watched. Afterward, he handed the phone back and asked everyone to return to their seats. He then said, "I'm granting 100% custody to the father as requested. No child support will be required from him, and given his income, I won't ask the mother to pay child support either. However, I will allow the mother weekly 2-hour visits with her daughter, with the first 6 months taking place during counseling sessions paid for by the father. His attendance is optional. The goal is to see if the mother and daughter can rebuild any relationship for the sake of their future." With that, the judge dismissed the court and left. Linda bent over the table, crying at the decree of 100% custody to Jimmy. Still, she held on to a faint hope that with counseling, she might be able to build some kind of relationship with her daughter and possibly even Jimmy. It was all she had left to hope for. She desperately wanted Molly to know she loved her and understood that her affair hadn't just hurt Jimmy, Molly, and the family. It had destroyed her own life. No one had been spared the pain. But perhaps the worst pain was Linda's own. 1 year later, the counseling sessions between Linda and her daughter, Molly, had been somewhat successful. Linda had gained a better understanding of why she made the choices she did, and Molly seemed to understand it through the counselor's help. While Molly couldn't fully forgive or justify it, she recognized that Linda was in as much, if not more, pain than both she and Jimmy. Despite everything that happened, Molly realized she still loved her mother, and eventually, she began spending occasional weekends at Linda's apartment and spending time with her. Linda had learned to treat Molly like an adult, allowing her to make her own decisions without criticism. They both knew that if nothing else, they would maintain a friendly relationship in the future. Linda would continue apologizing until one day Molly said, "Just let it go, leave it in the past, and let's never speak of it again." Linda often tried to get information about Jimmy from Molly, asking how he looked, if he was dating, or if he seemed happy. Molly could tell her mother still loved him deeply, but she knew Jimmy would never trust or love Linda again. So, rather than dwell on Jimmy, Molly encouraged her mother to start dating and find a fresh start. Jimmy never attended the counseling sessions. He had mended his relationship with his parents and maintained a close bond with Amanda and her kids. Amanda had left Dan and was rebuilding her life. True to his word, Jimmy never responded to any of Dan's or his parents' attempts at reconciliation. If Dan was attending any family event, Jimmy simply wouldn't show up. It had been a year since Jimmy had spoken to or seen Dan, and he remained comfortable with his decision to cut him off. Jimmy poured his energy into his relationship with Molly first, and his work second. Over the past year, he hadn't dated or gone out with friends to party. Molly encouraged him to start living again, and she felt he might be getting close to rejoining the dating scene. Linda, meanwhile, still looked back on her actions with regret. A 10-week affair of meaningless sex, thrilling in the moment, had devastated the lives of everyone she loved. The guilt and pain caused by her choices would never leave her. She tried to manage her depression and guilt by becoming a better mother, daughter, friend, and employee in all her relationships. But she knew her life would never be what it once was or what it could have been. Actions have consequences, and she had been foolish not to consider them when her desire for a cheap thrill overtook her. She had thrown away the best life she could have had. She had forced her daughter to face adult pain far earlier than she ever wanted for her. And she had destroyed the love, trust, partnership, and joy she once had with her family, knowing she would never experience those things again.